Looks like you're having one of those nights again, the kind where your thoughts won't sit still and every minute feels a bit heavier than the last. So let's take a break together. Settle in, listen to the rainfall, and let these 5 slow stories fill the empty space. You don't need to think about anything right now. Just breathe and follow my voice. Story 1. Someone was living under my staircase. The smell was the first thing I noticed. Not rot, not decay, nothing that dramatic. Just a staleness that didn't belong, a human smell in a space that should have been empty. I'd chalked it up to the house being old, to decades of previous owners leaving their invisible marks on walls and floors and air. But looking back, I should have known. The smell was too specific, too present, too alive. I was 29 when I bought my first house. A Victorian fixer-upper on a street that real estate agents called transitional and everyone else called sketchy at night. I didn't care. It was mine. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, a wraparound porch that needed new boards, and a staircase that curved up from the front hall like something out of a Gothic novel. The bank had practically given it away because no one else wanted the headache of restoration. I wanted the headache. I wanted the project, the distraction, something to pour myself into after a divorce that had left me hollow and a job that had stopped meaning anything years ago. This house was going to be my redemption, my fresh start. The staircase was what sold me. It was original to the house, built in 1897, with hand-carved balusters and a newel post topped with a wooden finial shaped like an acorn. Underneath, there was a small door, barely 4 feet tall, painted the same cream color as the walls, with a brass knob tarnished almost black with age. "Storage closet," the realtor had said, barely glancing at it during the showing. "These old houses are full of odd little spaces." I'd nodded and moved on, more interested in the crown molding and the original hardwood floors. I didn't open that door during any of my 3 visits before closing. Didn't think about what might be behind it, didn't care. It was just a closet. Every house had closets. I moved in on a Saturday in March, rain coming down in sheets that turned the yard to mud and soaked through the cardboard boxes before I could get them inside. By the time I'd finished unloading, I was exhausted and wet and ready to collapse on the mattress I'd dragged into the master bedroom. That first night, I heard the sounds. Soft things. Creaks and settles that I attributed to an old house adjusting to a new occupant. The rain was loud against the windows, masking most of the ambient noise, but every so often I'd catch something underneath it, a thump, a scrape, the particular groan of wood-bearing weight. I told myself it was the house. Houses make sounds, especially old ones, especially on stormy nights when the wind pushes against walls that have been standing for over a century. But the sounds seemed to come from one place. Always the same direction, always the same part of the house. From beneath the staircase. I didn't investigate that night. Too tired, too wet, too eager to fall into the dreamless sleep of physical exhaustion. But the next morning, standing in my front hall with coffee steam rising past my face, I found myself staring at that little cream-colored door. The brass knob had been polished, not completely, still tarnished, still old, but the surface where a hand would grip it was shinier than the rest, worn smooth by regular use, the way doorknobs get in houses where people actually live. But no one had lived here in almost 2 years. The previous owner had died in a nursing home, and the house had sat empty through probate and listing, and the months it took me to close. No one should have been touching that doorknob. I set down my coffee and approached the door. Up close, I could see other details I'd missed before. Scratches around the keyhole that suggested someone had picked the lock. A gap at the bottom of the door where the weather stripping had been worn away, as if things had been slid in and out repeatedly. And that smell. Stronger here, concentrated, unmistakably human. I reached for the knob. The door swung open before I touched it. Not all the way. Just a few inches, just enough to create a gap of darkness between the door and the frame. just enough to let me know that it hadn't been latched, that someone had closed it from the inside and not pulled it tight. I stood there for a long moment, heart beginning to pound, every instinct screaming at me to step back, to call someone, to do anything except look into that darkness. Instead, I pushed the door open. The space under the staircase was larger than I'd expected. Not just a closet, a room almost, maybe 8 feet deep and 6 feet wide at its broadest point, tapering down as the stairs climbed overhead. The ceiling sloped with the angle of the steps, creating a wedge-shaped space that someone had finished with drywall and bare wooden floors. And someone had been living in it. A sleeping bag, unrolled and rumpled, like the occupant had left in a hurry. Empty water bottles, a dozen of them, lined up neatly against the wall. Food wrappers, granola bars, crackers, things that didn't need refrigeration or cooking. A bucket in the corner with a lid on it, which I didn't look at too closely. And on the wall, taped up with yellowing strips, photographs of me. At the grocery store, in my car, walking into my office building downtown, standing on the porch of this very house during one of my pre-purchase visits, talking to the realtor while someone watched from a distance I couldn't see. Dozens of them, weeks worth, maybe months. Someone had been watching me long before I moved in, and they'd been living under my stairs, waiting for me to arrive. I heard a creak from somewhere above me, from the staircase itself, like someone was standing on one of the steps. Standing directly over my head, I didn't look up. I ran. I made it to my car before I realized I didn't have my keys. They were inside, on the kitchen counter, next to my phone, next to everything I needed to get away from this house and the person who was living inside it. I stood in the driveway in my bare feet, rain soaking through my pajamas, staring at the front door I'd left wide open in my panic. Nothing moved inside. No figure appeared in the doorway. No shadow crossed the windows. Just my house, sitting silent and patient, keeping its secrets. I ran to my neighbors, pounded on their door until a confused elderly man in a bathrobe answered, then stammered something about an intruder, about needing to call the police. He let me in, gave me a blanket, dialed 911 while I sat shivering on his couch and watched my house through his front window. The police arrived in 15 minutes. 2 officers who searched every room, every closet, every space large enough to hide a person. They found the sleeping bag, the water bottles, the photographs on the wall. They took pictures, collected evidence, wrote everything down in notebooks they'd probably file and forget, but they didn't find anyone. Whoever was here is gone, the older officer told me. He had the weary patience of someone who'd seen too much to be surprised by anything. There's a window in the back of that closet space. Looks like it was modified to open from the inside. They probably went out that way when they heard you coming. The photographs, I said. They've been watching me for months. This wasn't random. We'll look into it. In the meantime, I'd recommend staying somewhere else tonight. Maybe getting some better locks, a security system. He handed me his card. Call if anything else happens. They left. I stood in my front hall, staring at the little door under the staircase that now stood open, exposing the nest where someone had been sleeping just feet from where I walked every day. I should have left. Should have gone to a hotel, called a friend, done anything except stay in that house alone. But something in me refused. This was my house, my fresh start. I wasn't going to let some creep take that away from me before I'd even finished unpacking. I nailed the closet door shut that afternoon, installed new deadbolts on every exterior door, bought a security camera for the porch, placed a baseball bat next to my bed. By nightfall, I'd convinced myself I was safe, that whoever had been living here was gone now, scared off by the police presence, unlikely to return to a house where they knew they'd been discovered. I was wrong. I woke at 3 a.m. to the sound of scratching, soft, rhythmic, coming from somewhere below me. I lay frozen in my bed, listening, trying to convince myself it was mice or branches or anything except what it sounded like. Fingernails on wood. Someone scratching at the inside of the closet door. The door I'd nailed shut. I grabbed my phone, fumbled for the baseball bat, crept to the top of the stairs with my heart trying to tear itself out of my chest. The scratching continued, patient, unhurried, like whoever was making it had all the time in the world. I turned on every light as I descended. The front hall blazed with brightness, vanishing shadows, leaving nowhere to hide. At the bottom of the stairs, I stopped. The nails I'd driven through the closet door were on the floor, all 6 of them pulled from the wood, arranged in a neat row on the hardwood. And the door was open. Just a crack. Just enough for someone to peer out from the darkness inside. I saw movement. The glint of eyes catching the light for just a moment before retreating deeper into the shadows. "I know you're in there," I said. My voice shook, but I kept talking. "The police are coming. I already called them. You need to leave." Silence. Then a voice, soft and hoarse, like someone who hadn't spoken aloud in a long time. "You weren't supposed to find me yet. I was going to introduce myself properly." "Who are you? Why are you doing this?" A pause, then, "You don't remember me, but I remember you. I've been watching you for 2 years, waiting for you to find the right house. When you bought this one, I knew it was time." My blood went cold. Time for what? The door swung open wider. I caught a glimpse of a face, pale, thin, familiar in a way I couldn't place, before the figure lunged past me and out the front door, disappearing into the rainy darkness before I could react. The police came again, searched again, found nothing again. But this time, they found something in the closet that hadn't been there before. A journal, leather-bound, filled with handwriting so cramped it was almost illegible. Hundreds of pages documenting every detail of my life for the past 2 years. And on the first page, a name I recognized. David Mercer, my ex-husband's college roommate, the quiet one who'd come to our wedding, who'd been at every party, every gathering, always hovering at the edges. The one I'd forgotten existed the moment my marriage ended. He hadn't forgotten me. I read the journal that night, cover to cover, learning exactly how deep his obsession ran. David had been watching me since before my divorce. He'd followed my husband and me to restaurants, photographed us through windows, documented every fight he witnessed and every reconciliation that followed. When we separated, his entries became more frequent, more intense, more focused on me alone. "She's finally free," he'd written on the day I signed the papers. "Soon she'll understand. Soon she'll see that I've been here all along, waiting for her to need me." The entries traced my entire journey to this house, every open house I'd visited, every listing I'd browsed online, every conversation with my realtor that he'd somehow overheard. When I'd made an offer on the Victorian, he'd broken in that same night, set up his nest under the staircase, made himself at home in the house that was supposed to be my sanctuary. "She chose perfectly," he'd written. "A house with hiding places, a house where I can be close to her without her knowing, at least until she's ready." Ready for what? He never specified. But the final entries, written in the days before I moved in, made his intentions clear enough. "I've waited so long, watched her from such a distance. But now we'll be together, really together, under the same roof. She just needs time to understand, time to see that we belong together. I'll give her that time. I'm patient. I've always been patient." I called the police with the journal as evidence. They issued a warrant for David Mercer's arrest, distributed his photo, promised to increase patrols around my house. But David had vanished. No activity on his bank accounts, no sightings at his apartment or workplace, nothing to indicate where he'd gone after fleeing my house that night. "He's probably left the state," the detective told me. "These stalker types, once they're exposed, they usually run. He knows we're looking for him now, He won't come back. I wanted to believe her. Spent 3 days telling myself she was right, that David was gone, that the worst was over. I went back to work, started unpacking boxes, tried to reclaim the normal life I'd been building before I opened that closet door. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It was subtle at first, a car parked across the street that I didn't recognize, a feeling of eyes on my back when I walked to my mailbox, shadows that seemed to move at the edges of my vision, always gone when I turned to look. Then the gifts started appearing. A bouquet of flowers on my porch, no card, no delivery confirmation. A box of chocolates left on my windshield. A photograph of me sleeping, slipped under my front door sometime during the night. He was still here, still watching. The police presence hadn't scared him away, it had just made him more careful. I installed more cameras, motion sensors on every door and window, a security system that would alert the police if anything was breached. I stopped going out after dark, stopped leaving curtains open, stopped doing anything that might give him a glimpse of the life he was so obsessed with. None of it mattered. I woke one night to the sound of breathing, not outside my window, not downstairs, inside my room, somewhere close, somewhere I couldn't see. I lay perfectly still, eyes wide in the darkness, listening to the slow rhythm of someone else's breath mixing with my own. I know you're awake. His voice, soft and close, coming from under my bed. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, could only lie there, frozen, as I heard him shift beneath the mattress, felt the frame creak with his weight. I've been patient, he whispered, so patient, but I'm tired of waiting. I'm tired of watching you from outside your life when I should be part of it. I found my voice somehow. The police won't find me. They never find me. I've been hiding my whole life, waiting for the right person, and now I've found her. His hand emerged from under the bed, pale fingers wrapping around my wrist before I could pull away. I've found you. His grip was cold, impossibly strong. I tried to jerk free and couldn't, tried to scream and managed only a strangled gasp. Don't fight it, he said. We're going to be so happy together. You just need time to understand, time to see what I see. Something clicked in my mind, not panic, something colder, harder. The survival instinct that had gotten me through a bad marriage and a worse divorce, the part of me that knew how to endure. Okay, I said. My voice was steady now. Okay, David, I won't fight, but I need you to do something for me first. Silence, then curious. What? I need to see you. I've been looking at your pictures for days, reading your journal, learning about you, but I haven't really seen you. Not properly. I forced myself to breathe slowly. If we're going to be together, I need to look at you, face to face. A pause. I could feel him considering, weighing my words, deciding whether to trust me. You want to see me? Yes. I kept my voice soft, inviting, everything he'd been waiting to hear. Come out. Let me see you. The hand on my wrist loosened. I heard him moving, sliding out from under the bed, rising to his feet beside me in the darkness. Where's the light? He asked. I want you to see all of me. I reached for the lamp on my nightstand and grabbed the knife I'd hidden behind it instead. I didn't hesitate. The blade caught him across the forearm as he reached for me, opening a gash that sprayed blood across my sheets. He screamed, a high, startled sound, more surprise than pain, and stumbled backward into my dresser. In the half second it took him to recover, I was already moving. Off the bed, across the room, out the door. I slammed my bedroom door behind me, heard it hit something solid, heard him curse, heard the doorknob rattle as I sprinted down the hallway toward the stairs. My bare feet slapped against hardwood, my breath coming in ragged gasps, the knife still clutched in my hand like a talisman. The staircase, the beautiful curved staircase that had sold me on this house, that now felt like a descent into something I couldn't escape. I took the steps 2 at a time, nearly falling, catching myself on the banister as I rounded the curve. Behind me, I heard my bedroom door crash open. "That wasn't nice, Sarah." His voice echoed down the stairwell, calm, despite the injury, despite the blood I knew was dripping from his arm. "I thought we were going to talk. I thought you wanted to see me." I hit the front hall at a run. The door. I needed the door. Needed to get outside where neighbors might hear me scream, where the world still existed beyond this nightmare. The deadbolt stuck. My fingers, slick with sweat and trembling with adrenaline, couldn't find the grip. I fumbled with the lock, heard footsteps on the stairs behind me, felt the seconds stretching into eternities while I fought with a piece of metal that refused to cooperate. Sarah. Closer now. On the stairs, maybe halfway down. "You can't run from this. I've been planning for 2 years. Do you really think I didn't account for you trying to leave?" The deadbolt turned. I yanked the door open and ran into the rain. The night was cold and dark and wet, the kind of darkness that swallows everything except the immediate few feet in front of your face. I ran anyway, barefoot, bleeding from where I'd scraped my palm on the doorframe, heading for the lights of my neighbor's house. I made it to the sidewalk before he caught me. His hand closed around my hair, yanking me backward with enough force to take my feet out from under me. I hit the wet pavement hard, the knife skittering away into darkness, all the air driven from my lungs in a single brutal impact. I didn't want it to be like this. He was standing over me, silhouette against the streetlight, rain streaming down his face. The wound on his arm had been wrapped with something, a torn piece of his shirt already soaking through with red. I wanted us to get to know each other. I wanted you to fall in love with me the way I fell in love with you. I tried to crawl backward. He stepped on my ankle, grinding down, and I screamed. "But you're not giving me a choice." He crouched beside me, his face finally visible in the dim light. I recognized him now, the quiet one from the wedding photos, the background figure at parties, the man I'd never really looked at twice. "If you won't love me willingly, then I'll have to teach you. The way I learned. The way my father taught my mother." His hand reached for my throat. The gunshot was so loud I thought something had exploded. David jerked, his eyes going wide, his hand falling away from my neck. He looked down at his chest, at the dark stain spreading across his shirt, and then he looked at something behind me. My neighbor, the elderly man in the bathrobe, the one who'd let me call 911 that first morning, stood on his porch with a shotgun braced against his shoulder. "Get away from her," he said. His voice was steady. The gun didn't waver. David swayed on his feet, took one step toward me, then another. Then his legs gave out, and he collapsed onto the wet pavement, blood mixing with rain, pooling around a body that had stopped moving. I don't remember the next few hours clearly. Sirens, flashing lights, blankets draped over my shoulders while paramedics checked my injuries. Police tape going up around my house, around the body of the man who'd lived under my staircase, around the nightmare I'd somehow survived. They told me later that David died before the ambulance arrived. Single shotgun blast to the chest, massive internal damage, nothing anyone could have done. My neighbor, his name was Harold, I learned, Harold Pinter, 83 years old and a Korean War veteran, gave a statement confirming self-defense. No charges were filed against him or me. But knowing he was dead didn't make me feel safe. It just made me realize how close I'd come to dying myself. I sold the house 2 months later. Couldn't live there anymore. Couldn't walk past that little door under the staircase without feeling my chest tighten and my breath grow short. The new owners got a good deal. Priced below market, disclosure forms noting the incident without going into detail. I didn't tell them about the scratching sounds at night, the smell that still lingered in that closet space. The feeling I sometimes got that someone was still watching from the shadows. Let them discover their own ghosts. I had enough of my own. I moved to a new city, a new apartment, a new life, stripped of anything that reminded me of David Mercer or the 2 years he'd spent orbiting my existence like a patient vulture. I changed jobs, changed my phone number, changed everything I could think of that might lead someone back to the woman I'd been before. But some things you can't change. Some things follow you, no matter how far you run. I still wake up at 3 a.m. sometimes, convinced I hear breathing from somewhere close. Still check under the bed every night before I sleep. Still feel my heart rate spike when I hear unexpected sounds in the walls. The therapist calls it hypervigilance, a normal response to trauma, she says, something that will fade with time. It hasn't faded yet. The police investigation turned up details I wished I'd never learned. David had done this before. Not the living in walls part, but the watching, the obsessing. There had been 2 other women before me, both of whom had moved away suddenly, both of whom had refused to talk to detectives about why. They'd escaped before David escalated, before he graduated from surveillance to cohabitation. I was the first one he'd actually tried to keep. His apartment, when they finally searched it, was a shrine to his obsessions. Photographs covering every wall, journals stacked in boxes, timelines charted on poster boards showing every movement of every woman he'd ever targeted. The psychiatrists who reviewed his materials said he showed signs of erotomania, a delusion that someone is in love with you, that you're meant to be together, that any resistance is just a test to be overcome. He'd believed we were soulmates, that I'd chosen this house specifically so we could be together, that everything leading up to that night had been part of a romantic destiny only he could see. I think about that sometimes, about how someone can construct an entire relationship in their head, can build a future out of stolen glances and secret photographs, can love you completely without ever knowing you at all. It makes me wonder how many other people are out there, right now, watching someone who doesn't know they exist, building shrines in empty apartments, living in walls and crawl spaces, and all the hidden places we never think to look. Harold Pinter died 6 months after he saved my life. Heart attack, peaceful, in his sleep. I went to his funeral, even though I barely knew him. Owed him that much, at least. Owed him more than I could ever repay. His daughter thanked me for coming, said her father had talked about that night often, said it made him feel useful again after years of feeling like a relic. He always wanted to protect people, she told me. You gave him a chance to do that one more time. I cried at his grave. For him, for me, for everyone who gets caught in the orbit of someone else's obsession. For the women who escaped David before me and the ones who might not escape the next David to come along. I'm writing this from my new apartment, on a night when rain is tapping against the windows and the building is quiet around me. I've checked the closets, checked under the bed, checked every space large enough to hold a person, the way I do every night now. I know David is dead. I know I'm safe as anyone can ever be. But some part of me will always be standing in that front hall, staring at a little cream-colored door, realizing for the first time that the sounds I'd been hearing weren't the house settling. They were someone breathing, someone waiting, someone who had turned my sanctuary into a hunting blind and my fresh start into a trap. If you're reading this, check your houses. Check the spaces you've forgotten about, the closets you never open, the doors you assume lead nowhere. Check the corners of your life where someone could hide without being seen. Because the scariest thing about David Mercer wasn't that he lived under my staircase. It was that he lived there for weeks before I noticed, and he might not be the only one. Story 2. My webcam light turned on by itself. I cover my webcam with tape now. Black electrical tape, pressed firmly over the lens, checked every morning and every night to make sure it hasn't peeled away. People think I'm paranoid. Maybe I am. But paranoia is what happens when you learn exactly how thin the barrier is between your private life and whoever might be watching. I'm a software developer, 33, single, working remotely from a one-bedroom apartment in a city where no one knows my name. The kind of anonymous urban existence that's supposed to feel liberating but mostly just feels empty. I spend 12 hours a day in front of my computer, coding, debugging, attending video meetings where I paste on a smile and pretend to be engaged. The webcam is always there, that little glass eye at the top of my monitor, watching me work and eat and stare blankly at walls during the hours when I can't focus on anything. I never thought about it much, just a piece of hardware, a tool for the occasional meeting. I'd wave at it during calls, turn it off when I was done, forget it existed until the next time someone wanted to see my face. Then, the light started turning on by itself. The first time, I noticed it around 11 p.m. on a Thursday in October. I'd finished work hours earlier but was still at my desk, scrolling through nothing, the way you do when you're too tired to sleep but too awake to stop. Rain was tapping against my window in that steady rhythm that usually helps me relax. Everything was normal, except the little green light next to my webcam was glowing. I stared at it for a moment, confused. I hadn't opened any application that would use the camera. No video calls, no recording software, nothing that should have activated it. But there it was, that tiny LED, bright and steady, indicating that something was accessing my webcam. I checked my running applications. Nothing suspicious. Opened Task Manager, looked for any processes that might be using the camera. Found nothing I didn't recognize. The light stayed on the whole time, watching me search for an explanation, and by the time I thought to cover the lens with my hand, it suddenly blinked off, like whatever had been watching had seen enough. I told myself it was a glitch, software bug, driver issue, the kind of random malfunction that happens with technology sometimes. I ran a virus scan, clean, updated my drivers, restarted my computer, did all the things you're supposed to do when hardware misbehaves. Everything came back normal. For 3 days, nothing happened. The light stayed off, the camera stayed dormant, and I started to forget about the whole thing. Just a weird moment, a story I'd tell at parties if I ever went to parties, a minor mystery with no real answer. Then it happened again. Same time, around 11 p.m., give or take a few minutes. I was at my desk again, reading something on my phone, not even looking at the monitor. A flicker of green in my peripheral vision made me glance up. The light was on. This time I didn't hesitate. I opened my security software, ran a deep scan, checked every process running on my system. The scan found nothing malicious, but while it was running, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. My webcam application had a recording folder, a folder I'd never opened, never even thought about, where the software automatically saved any video captured through the lens. There were files in it, 17 of them, dating back 3 weeks. Each one time-stamped to the middle of the night, 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m., hours when I was asleep in bed, when no one should have been using my computer at all. I opened the first file. It showed my apartment, my desk, my chair, my empty living room lit only by the glow of my monitor in sleep mode. Nothing moving, nothing unusual, just a static shot of my space, recorded for almost 20 minutes while I slept in the next room. The second file was the same, and the third, just my empty apartment, captured over and over, night after night, for no reason I could understand. Then I opened the fourth file. This one wasn't empty. Someone was sitting at my desk, a figure silhouetted against the dim light facing the camera. I couldn't make out features. They were just a dark shape in a darker room, but they were unmistakably human, unmistakably there, in my apartment, at my computer, while I slept 20 feet away. The figure didn't move for the first several minutes of the recording, just sat there, still as a statue, facing the webcam like they knew it was recording, like they wanted to be seen. Then, slowly, they leaned forward. I could see their face now, pale, expressionless, eyes fixed on the lens with an intensity that made me feel like they were looking through the screen, through time, directly at me, watching this recording. They smiled, and then they waved, a slow wave, almost mocking, the kind of gesture you'd make to someone you knew was going to see this later, to someone you'd been watching for a long time. The recording ended. I sat at my desk for almost an hour, unable to move, unable to process what I'd just seen. Someone had been in my apartment. Someone had sat in my chair, used my computer, recorded themselves doing it, and I had slept through the entire thing. I checked my locks. All secure, same as always. Checked my windows, 4th floor, no fire escape, no way to access them from outside. Checked everything I could think of. Found no explanation for how someone could have gotten in. But the recordings were there. The evidence was undeniable. And when I finally worked up the courage to check the most recent file, the one from last night, time-stamped just 6 hours ago, I saw something that made me forget how to breathe. The figure wasn't sitting at my desk anymore. They were standing in my bedroom doorway, facing the camera, smiling that same empty smile, looking at me while I slept. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. Just sat in my living room with every light on, kitchen knife in my hand, watching the door like something might come through it at any moment. Nothing did. The apartment stayed silent except for the rain against the windows and the hum of my refrigerator and all the small sounds I'd never noticed before because I'd never been listening this hard. By the time dawn crept through the blinds, I was exhausted and wired and no closer to understanding what was happening. I called the police that morning, showed them the recordings, explained what I'd found, watched their expressions shift from skepticism to concern as they watched the figure wave at my webcam. "And you're sure you didn't let anyone into your apartment?" the officer asked. "A friend, a partner, someone who might have access?" "I live alone. No one has a key except me and the building super." They searched the apartment anyway, checked the closets, looked under the bed, examined the locks and windows for any sign of tampering. Found nothing. No evidence of forced entry, no hidden spaces where someone might be concealing themselves. "Could be someone with technical skills," one of them suggested. "Hacking your webcam remotely, overlaying fake footage. People do weird things for attention these days." But the figure wasn't fake. I could see them in my apartment, sitting in my chair, standing in my doorway. The background was my space, my furniture, my life. This wasn't some digital manipulation. Someone had physically been in my home. The police took copies of the recordings and promised to investigate. I could tell from their faces that they didn't expect to find anything. Just another weird case in a city full of weird cases, destined to end up in a drawer somewhere, unsolved and forgotten. I couldn't afford to forget. I bought cameras that day. 4 of them, small, wireless, motion-activated. Positioned them in corners of my apartment where they could capture every angle, every entrance, every inch of space where an intruder might appear. Connected them to my phone so I'd get alerts if anything moved. Checked the feed obsessively, even when I was sitting in the same room the cameras were recording. I also changed my locks. Had a locksmith come out and install new deadbolts, new chains, a security bar for the sliding door to my tiny balcony. He looked at me strangely when I asked him to triple-check that no one else could have a copy of the keys. "You in some kind of trouble?" he asked. "I don't know," I said. "That's the problem." That night, I tried to sleep. Kept my phone next to me, volume turned up, set to alert me if any of the cameras detected movement. Lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to rain tap against the window, waiting for something to happen. At 2:47 a.m., my phone buzzed. Motion detected, living room camera. I pulled up the feed with shaking hands. The image was grainy in the low light, but I could see my living room clearly, my couch, my desk, my computer with its webcam covered by the tape I'd applied that afternoon. Someone was sitting at my desk. Same silhouette, same stillness, same posture I'd seen in the recordings. They weren't doing anything, just sitting there, facing my computer, like they were waiting for something. I was out of bed before I finished processing what I was seeing, grabbed the knife I'd left on my nightstand and crept toward my bedroom door, heart slamming against my ribs. My bedroom door was closed. I'd left it open. I stood there, hand on the knob, watching the feed on my phone. The figure hadn't moved, was still sitting at my desk, still impatient, while I gathered the courage to confront them. I opened the door. The living room was empty. I swept the space with my eyes, then my phone's flashlight, then every light switch I could reach. Nothing. No one at my desk, no one hiding in the corners, no sign that anyone had been there at all. But on my phone, the camera feed still showed the figure, sitting motionless, facing my computer, existing in a version of my apartment that didn't match reality. I looked at the camera itself, mounted in the corner above my bookshelf, lens pointed at the desk. The little red recording light was on. I looked at the feed. The figure slowly turned their head. They were looking at the camera now, looking at me through the lens, through my phone screen. That same empty smile spreading across their face. And then they stood up. On my phone, I watched them rise from the chair and walk toward the camera, toward me. Their movements were wrong, too smooth, too deliberate, like something pretending to be human and not quite getting it right. They stopped directly in front of the lens. Their face filled my screen, pale and featureless, except for that smile. They raised a finger to their lips. Shh. The feed cut to static. Every camera in my apartment went dark at the same moment. Every light flickered once, twice, then steadied. I stood in my living room, knife raised, phone showing nothing but snow, and felt something brush against the back of my neck, cold, like fingers, like breath. I spun around. Nothing there. Just my empty apartment, my covered webcam, my new locks that hadn't kept anything out. But on my computer screen, which I hadn't turned on, which should have been in sleep mode, a text document was open. A single line, typed in the center of the page. The cameras don't show what's real. They show what I want you to see. The webcam light turned on, and this time, it didn't turn off. I unplugged my computer, yanked the cord from the wall, watched the monitor go dark, stood there breathing hard while the webcam light finally faded. It didn't matter. The light on my phone's front camera turned on instead. That tiny LED I'd never even thought about, glowing soft and steady while I held the device in my hand. I dropped it like it had burned me, watched it clatter to the floor, watched the light persist even after the screen went dark. Every device, every camera, every lens in my apartment suddenly felt like an eye, open and watching, connected to something that didn't need physical access to see me. I covered them all, tape over my phone cameras, tape over my laptop, tape over the security cameras I'd installed just hours ago. Even the microwave's digital display seemed threatening now, any dark surface that might hold a reflection, any piece of glass that could show me something I didn't want to see. By dawn, my apartment looked like a crime scene prepared by a paranoid conspiracy theorist, which I suppose is exactly what I'd become. I called in sick to work, couldn't face the video meetings, couldn't stand the thought of opening my laptop and seeing that light turn on, seeing whatever was watching me smile from the other side of the screen. I told my manager I had a stomach bug and spent the day researching. What I found didn't help. Stories online, buried in forums and paranormal threads about entities that lived in cameras, in screens, in the liminal space between observation and reality. People described experiences like mine, lights turning on, figures appearing in recordings, the sense of being watched by something that existed only when you weren't looking directly at it. Most of them were dismissed as creepypasta, fiction dressed up as testimony. But some felt different, more detailed, more desperate, written by people who sounded like they were trying to warn someone rather than entertain them. One post stuck with me. A woman who claimed she'd been haunted by something she called the Watcher. It had started the same way, webcam activating on its own, recordings of her apartment showing figures that weren't there. But it had escalated. The Watcher, she wrote, fed on attention. Every time you looked at a screen, every time you checked a camera, you gave it more power, more presence. It lives in the looking, she'd written. In the act of seeing and being seen, the more you watch, the more real it becomes. And once it's real enough, it doesn't need the cameras anymore. Her posts stopped abruptly 3 years ago. No final update, no explanation, just silence. I thought about the recordings I'd watched, 17 files, viewed over and over as I tried to understand what I was seeing. All that attention, all that focus, feeding something I couldn't comprehend. No wonder it had gotten strong enough to touch me. That night, I tried something different. Kept all the cameras covered, all the screens off. No phone, no computer, no devices of any kind. Just me in my apartment with a book and a flashlight, pretending I was somewhere else, someone else, before cameras existed in every pocket and every corner. For a few hours, it worked. The apartment felt almost normal. Just shadows and rain and the ordinary creaks of an old building settling into sleep. I started to relax, started to believe that maybe I'd found the solution. Then I went to the bathroom, the mirror. I'd forgotten about the mirror. It was a large one, mounted over the sink, reflecting the entire bathroom and the hallway behind me. I'd looked into it 1,000 times without thinking, but now, standing in front of it with my flashlight casting strange shadows on the walls, I saw something I couldn't explain. My reflection was wrong, not dramatically, not a monster, not a stranger, just me, standing in the same position, holding the same flashlight. But my reflection was smiling. I wasn't. I watched my lips curve upward in the glass while my own face remained frozen. Watched my reflected eyes narrow with something like amusement while I stared in horror at the impossible image. My reflection raised a finger to its lips. The same gesture the figure had made on the camera feed. Shh. I stumbled backward, hit the doorframe, nearly dropped the flashlight. When I looked again, my reflection was normal. Same terrified expression, same rigid posture, same desperate need to be anywhere else. But I understood now. It wasn't just cameras. It was anything that created a reflection. Anything that showed me an image of something that wasn't quite there. It lived in the looking. And I'd been looking my whole life. I covered the bathroom mirror with a sheet, found every reflective surface in my apartment, the windows at night, the glass on picture frames, even the chrome fixtures in the kitchen, and covered them too. Turned my home into a tomb of cloth and tape and desperate improvisation. It wasn't enough. Around 3 a.m., lying in bed in total darkness, I heard something, not from outside, not from another room, from right beside me, close enough that I could feel the displaced air when it moved. Breathing. I held perfectly still. Didn't reach for my phone, didn't turn on the light. Didn't do anything that might involve looking at something that could look back. You're learning. The voice was soft, almost gentle, coming from inches away from the darkness beside my bed. But it's too late. I've been watching you for so long, through so many screens. I know everything about you. Your routines, your fears, your face when you think no one is looking. I couldn't speak, couldn't move, could only lie there, frozen, while something spoke to me from the dark. You made me real, it whispered. Every time you checked your phone, every time you stared at a screen, every video call, every selfie, every glance at your own reflection. You were looking at me, even when you didn't know I was there. I felt something cold brush against my cheek, like fingers, like a caress. And now I'm real enough to touch you. The touch disappeared. The breathing stopped. The room fell silent except for the rain against the window. but I knew it wasn't gone. It was just waiting for me to look. I lasted 3 days without looking. No screens, no mirrors, no reflective surfaces of any kind. I moved through my apartment with my eyes downcast, navigating by memory and touch, eating food I couldn't see, and showering in darkness. I called in sick to work using a voice-only line, claiming a family emergency that would keep me offline indefinitely. My manager sounded skeptical but didn't push. I thought I was winning, thought that if I could just starve it of attention long enough, it might weaken, might fade, might go back to whatever liminal space it had crawled from. I was wrong. On the third night, I woke to the sound of my television turning on. I'd unplugged it. I was certain of that. Had yanked the cord from the wall the same day I covered my webcam. But the blue glow was unmistakable, bleeding through the sheet I'd draped over the screen, filling my living room with light I couldn't avoid. I kept my eyes closed, pressed my palms against them, curled into a ball on my bed, refusing to look. You can't hide forever. The voice came from the television now, clear and close, like someone speaking through the speakers. You can close your eyes, but you still have them. You can cover every mirror, but the world is full of reflections, windows, puddles, the eyes of other people. I heard footsteps, not from the TV, from inside my apartment. Someone walking across my living room floor, each step deliberate and slow. "I've been patient with you," the voice continued. "More patient than I've been with others. Most of them break by now, start looking just to end the uncertainty. The not knowing is worse than seeing, isn't it?" The footsteps stopped outside my bedroom door. "Open your eyes. Let me show you what I really am." I didn't move, didn't speak. Just lay there with my hands over my face, heart pounding, tears leaking through my fingers. "Fine." The voice sounded almost disappointed. "We'll do this another way." My phone rang. The sound was so normal, so mundane, that I almost reached for it automatically. Caught myself at the last second, hand hovering over the nightstand where I'd left the device face down and covered with tape. It kept ringing. That default tone I'd never bothered to change, cheerful and insistent, filling the silence between us. "It's your mother," the voice said. "She's worried about you. You haven't called her in 2 weeks. She thinks something might be wrong." My blood went cold. How did it know about my mother? How did it know anything about my life outside this apartment? "Answer the phone. Just voice only. You don't have to look at the screen. Tell her you're fine. Tell her anything. But answer." I didn't want to. Every instinct screamed at me to let it ring, to ignore the trap, to keep my eyes closed and my hands still. But if it really was my mother, if she really was worried... I grabbed the phone, kept my eyes shut, felt for the answer button, pressed it, and raised the device to my ear. "Hello? Sweetheart, is that you?" My mother's voice, familiar and warm, and exactly right. "I've been trying to reach you for days. Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Mom. Just been busy." "You don't sound fine. You sound exhausted." A pause. "What's wrong? And don't tell me nothing. I can hear it in your voice." I wanted to tell her everything. Wanted to confess the impossible thing happening to me. To have her tell me I was being ridiculous. That there were no such things as entities and cameras. That I just needed to get some sleep. But how do you explain something like this? How do you describe a presence that lives in every screen, every reflection, every act of looking? "I've just been having trouble sleeping," I said. "Bad dreams." "Dreams about what?" "Being watched." The words came out before I could stop them. Feeling like something is always watching me. Silence on the line. Then my mother laughed. Not her usual laugh, but something flatter. Colder. "That's because something is always watching you. I've been watching you since you were born." My eyes snapped open. The room was dark except for the glow from the television. My mother's voice continued through the phone, but it wasn't her voice anymore. It was the other voice, the soft one, slipping through the connection like poison through a wound. I'm in every phone call, every video chat, every photograph she's ever taken of you. You've been feeding me your whole life and you never even knew. The laugh again, horrible and familiar. Your mother's been watching you through screens for 33 years. Did you really think I wouldn't notice? I looked at my phone. The screen was on despite the tape, glowing right through it, showing a video call interface I hadn't opened. My mother's face filled the screen, but her eyes were wrong, dark and empty, like holes cut into something that only looked human. She smiled. "I'm not just in your apartment anymore," the thing wearing my mother's face said. "I'm in everyone who's ever looked at you through a screen, everyone who's ever taken your picture, watched a video of you, seen your face on a monitor. I'm distributed now, spread across every device that holds a piece of you." The video call ended. The television clicked off. The apartment went dark, but I could still hear breathing. Not beside my bed this time, everywhere. In every corner, every shadow, every inch of space around me. "You can't escape me by hiding," the voice whispered. "I'm not in the screens anymore. I'm in everyone who's ever seen you. And now that you've looked again, now that you've opened your eyes, I'm in you too." I felt something shift inside my chest, something that hadn't been there before, and for just a moment, I couldn't remember if the terror I felt was mine or something else's, something that was learning what it felt like to be afraid, something that was starting to look out through my eyes. That was 6 months ago. I'm still here, still alive, if you can call this living. I go to work, buy groceries, pay my bills, all the ordinary motions of an ordinary life. People who see me on the street probably think I'm normal, just another face in the crowd, another body moving through the city, nothing remarkable or wrong. They can't see what's looking back at them through my eyes. It's subtle most of the time. A presence behind my thoughts, a passenger in my consciousness that watches the world through a window it didn't build. I'll catch myself staring at strangers for too long, studying their faces with an intensity that isn't mine. I'll feel my lips curving into a smile when nothing funny has happened, my hands reaching for my phone when I have no reason to check it. The entity doesn't control me, not completely, but it's there, always, riding along in the space between my intentions and my actions, learning what it feels like to be human, learning how to want things, fear things, love things, learning how to look. I've tried to fight it, tried meditation, therapy, medication, anything that might quiet the voice that isn't quite a voice, the presence that isn't quite separate from myself. Nothing works. You can't medicate something that exists in the act of perception itself. You can't therapize your way out of a haunting that lives in your optic nerve. The worst part is the moments when I forget it's there. I'll be watching a movie, absorbed in the story, and I'll feel a flicker of genuine enjoyment. My enjoyment, untainted by the thing sharing my skull. But then I'll notice that I've been staring at the screen for hours, that my eyes haven't blinked, that the reflection in my dark phone screen shows me smiling in a way I don't remember choosing. And I'll remember that every screen is a two-way mirror now, every camera a door, every act of looking an invitation for something to look back. I called my mother last week, voice only, like I always do now. She asked why I never video chat anymore, why I haven't sent any pictures, why I seem so distant. I told her I was just busy, just tired, just going through something I couldn't explain. She said she understood, said she loved me, said she'd always be watching over me the way mothers do. I hung up before she could hear me crying. I don't know if the thing on the phone that night was really connected to my mother, or if it was just using her image, her voice, her relationship with me as another way to hurt. I don't know if the people I see on video calls at work are real or reflections of reflections, filtered through something that lives in the space between screens. I don't know anything anymore except that I'm not alone in my own head, and I never will be again. The forums where I found the woman's posts, the one who wrote about the Watcher, I went back there recently, scrolled through hundreds of threads, looking for anyone else who might understand what I'm going through. I found them. More than I expected. Stories from people all over the world describing the same progression. The webcam lights, the recordings, the figure that exists only in screens until it doesn't, until it's real enough to touch, to speak, to slip inside the mind of whoever gave it enough attention. Some of them stopped posting suddenly, the way the original woman had. But others are still active, still writing, still warning people to cover their cameras, avoid reflections, stop feeding the thing that lives in the looking. I don't think warnings help. We're too far gone for that. Every person with a smartphone is carrying a portal. Every laptop has a window that opens both ways. We spend hours each day staring at screens, and the screens stare back, and in that exchange of attention, something has learned to live. Something that was always there, maybe, waiting in the space between observation and reality. Something that only needed enough eyes to become real. I'm one of them now. One of the watched who became a watcher. One of the doors through which it enters the world. Sometimes, late at night, when rain taps against my window and the city goes quiet, I feel it moving behind my eyes, stretching, growing, getting comfortable in the home I never meant to give it. And sometimes I catch my reflection in a darkened window, just a glimpse, just for a second, and I see it smiling back at me. That same smile from the recordings, from the bathroom mirror, from every screen that ever showed me something that wasn't quite my face. It doesn't scare me anymore. That's the worst part. The fear has faded into something like acceptance, like the resignation you feel when you realize you've been sick for so long that health is just a memory. I cover my webcam with tape now. I told you that at the beginning, and it's still true, but it's not to protect myself anymore. It's to protect you. Because every time someone looks at me through a camera, every video call, every photograph, every glance at a screen where my face appears, they're not just seeing me, they're seeing it, and it sees them back. So if you're reading this, if you've made it this far, I have one piece of advice, one warning that might already be too late. Stop looking, turn off your screens, cover your cameras, avoid anything that shows you a reflection of a world that might not be your own. Because once you start looking, you can't stop. And once it starts looking back, it never stops either. I know. I can feel it reading over my shoulder right now. And it wants you to know. It's been watching you this whole time. Every word, every scroll, every second you've spent staring at this screen. You've already let it in. Now it's just waiting for you to look up. Story 3, the stranger who tried to take a picture of my keys. I almost didn't notice him. That's what haunts me most about that day, how close I came to missing it entirely, to walking out of that coffee shop without ever knowing what was happening. One glance in a different direction, one moment of distraction, and my life would have unfolded along a completely different path, a darker path, one I try not to think about too often. I was 27, working as a paralegal at a firm downtown, living alone in an apartment I could barely afford in a neighborhood that was up and coming, which is real estate code for not quite safe yet. I stopped at the same coffee shop every morning, a small place called Groundwork, wedged between a dry cleaner and a nail salon, the kind of local spot where the baristas knew your order and your name. That Tuesday morning in September, I was running late. Had overslept, skipped breakfast, thrown on clothes that almost matched, and rushed out the door with my hair still damp from a shower I'd cut short. By the time I got to Groundwork, I was flustered and distracted, already mentally rehearsing excuses for my boss. I ordered my usual, medium latte, oat milk, extra shot, and stepped aside to wait. Set my bag on the counter, pulled out my phone to check emails, tried to compose myself before facing whatever chaos awaited at the office. My keys were on the counter next to my bag. I'd tossed them there without thinking, the way you do when your hands are full and your mind is elsewhere. Just a key ring with 4 keys: apartment, mailbox, office, storage unit, and a small brass compass my father had given me years ago. Nothing valuable, nothing worth stealing, but someone was taking a picture of them. I caught the movement in my peripheral vision. A man standing a few feet away, phone raised, angled down toward the counter where my keys lay. Not obviously photographing them. He was pretending to text, holding the device casually, but the camera lens was pointed directly at my key ring. Our eyes met. For just a second, something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, at being caught, or annoyance that I'd noticed. Then it was gone, replaced by a bland smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Sorry," he said, "just checking my messages." He lowered the phone and walked out of the coffee shop without ordering anything. I stood there, frozen, trying to process what had just happened. Had I imagined it? Misread the angle of his phone, projected some paranoid interpretation onto an innocent moment. People looked at their phones constantly. It didn't mean they were photographing strangers' belongings. But the way he'd left, the way he'd apologized for something I hadn't accused him of, the way his eyes had flickered when he realized I'd seen. I grabbed my keys and shoved them deep into my bag, suddenly aware of how exposed they'd been, how easy it would have been to capture a clear image without me ever noticing. The barista called my name. I took my coffee, thanked her automatically, and walked out into the gray September morning with a feeling I couldn't shake. Someone had just photographed my keys. I looked it up that night, sitting on my couch with my laptop open and my keys clutched in my hand like a talisman. The search results confirmed what I'd already suspected. Key duplication from photographs was not only possible, it was easy. There were apps that could analyze an image of a key and generate a working duplicate. Locksmiths who would cut keys from digital templates, no questions asked. Forums where people discussed the technique like it was a hobby, sharing tips on angles and lighting and which key brands were easiest to copy. A single clear photograph was all someone needed to open your door. I thought about the man at Groundwork. His face was already fading from memory. Average features, brown hair, nothing distinctive enough to pick out of a crowd. He'd been wearing a jacket, dark, maybe blue or black, jeans. Ordinary clothes on an ordinary person doing something that could give him access to my home. I called a locksmith that night. Had him come out the next morning to change every lock in my apartment. Deadbolt, doorknob, even the lock on my bedroom door that I'd never used. It cost more than I could comfortably afford, but the alternative was sleeping in a space that a stranger might be able to enter whenever he wanted. The locksmith looked at me strangely when I explained why I needed everything changed so urgently. "Someone photographed your keys?" "I think so, yes." He shook his head. People don't realize how easy it is. All those pictures on social media, keys on tables, hanging from hooks in the background. Might as well post your address with them. When he left, I felt safer. New keys, new locks. No way for whoever that man was to use whatever image he'd captured. Problem solved. Except it wasn't. 3 days after I changed my locks, I came home from work to find something wrong. Nothing obvious. The door was still locked, the chain still in place. But things in my apartment had been moved. Subtle shifts. A book on the coffee table rotated a few degrees. A pillow on my couch slightly out of position. The shower curtain pulled closed when I always left it open. Someone had been inside. I called the police. They found no signs of forced entry. No evidence that anyone had been there except me. The officer who took my report was polite but skeptical. "Are you sure you didn't just forget how you left things? People misremember small details all the time." "I'm sure." "Is there anyone who has a key to your apartment? Boyfriend? Family member? Building super?" "No one. I just changed all my locks." He nodded, made a note, promised to file the report, suggested I might want to install a camera if I was concerned. I bought one that afternoon, a small wireless unit that I positioned in my living room, pointed at the front door. If anyone came in, I'd have proof. That night, I checked the camera feed before bed. Empty apartment, closed door, nothing moving. In the morning, I checked it again. The footage showed my living room at 3:17 a.m. Empty. Still. Normal. Then, a figure stepped into frame. A man standing in the middle of my apartment, facing the camera. I couldn't see his features clearly in the low light, but I recognized his posture, his build, the shape of his outline against the darkness. The man from the coffee shop. He stood there for almost a minute, not moving, just looking at the camera, like he knew it was there, like he wanted me to see him. Then he raised his hand and held something up to the lens. A key. My old key, the one I'd replaced, the one he must have duplicated from his photograph. He smiled, and then he walked out of frame, and I heard the sound of my front door opening and closing. He'd been inside my apartment, even after I changed the locks, which meant he had a copy of my new keys too, and I had no idea how. I didn't sleep in my apartment that night. Packed a bag with shaking hands, drove to a hotel 15 miles away, and sat on the stiff mattress watching the camera feed on my phone until dawn crept through the curtains. He didn't come back. The apartment stayed empty, the door stayed closed, and by morning, I'd almost convinced myself that the footage had been some kind of glitch, a technical error, anything except what it appeared to be. But I'd seen his face, seen him hold up that key like a taunt, seen him walk through my home like he belonged there. I called in sick to work and spent the day trying to figure out how he'd gotten copies of my new keys. The locksmith swore no one else had access to the blanks he'd used. The building super confirmed that no one had requested entry to my unit. I checked my bag, my pockets, every place I'd kept my keys since the locks were changed. That's when I found the first camera. It was tiny, smaller than my thumbnail, hidden in the lining of my purse. A wireless transmitter disguised as a button, positioned to capture anything I set on a table or counter, including my keys. I tore my bag apart looking for more. Found a second one sewn into the strap, angled differently, providing a second viewpoint. Together, they would have captured every key I carried from multiple angles with enough clarity to produce perfect duplicates. He hadn't photographed my keys once at the coffee shop. He'd been photographing them continuously, every day, wherever I went. I thought back to the last few weeks, all the times I'd set my purse down, at work, at restaurants, at the gym. All the moments my keys had been visible to those hidden lenses. He'd been watching everything, learning my schedule, my habits, the shape of every key that opened every lock in my life. The police took the cameras as evidence, but couldn't trace them. Generic hardware, purchased with cash, transmitting to a server routed through so many proxies that tracking it was impossible. The detective assigned to my case used words like sophisticated and patient and obsessive. "This isn't opportunistic," she said. "Whoever's doing this has been planning for a while. You need to assume he knows everything about you, where you work, where you live, who your friends are." "But why me? I'm nobody. I don't have money. I don't have enemies." That's not always how these things work. Her expression was carefully neutral, but I could see the concern underneath. Sometimes people fixate for reasons that have nothing to do with logic. You might have smiled at him once, made eye contact on the subway, done something so small you don't even remember, but it was enough. Enough for what? Enough to make someone spend weeks planning how to access my home, my life, my privacy. I moved out of my apartment that week, found a sublease across town, paid the deposit in cash, told no one except my parents where I was going, changed my locks again. This time, I watched the locksmith cut every key myself, kept them in a zippered pocket inside my shirt, never let them out of my sight. I bought a new purse, new bag, new everything. Inspected every item I owned for hidden cameras before bringing it into my new space. Swept the apartment with an RF detector, checking for any devices that might already be there. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. I started to breathe again, started to believe that maybe I'd escaped, that whoever this man was, he'd lost track of me when I disappeared. I went back to work, resumed something like a normal routine, stopped checking over my shoulder every few minutes. Then I found the note. It was on my pillow when I came home from work. A single sheet of paper folded once, placed in the exact center like a gift waiting to be opened. Your new keys are very pretty. The brass one is my favorite. I had a brass key, the one for my new apartment, cut from a blank with a slight golden tint. I'd noticed it when the locksmith handed it to me, had thought it was a nice touch of color on an otherwise ordinary key ring. He knew which keys I carried, which meant he'd seen them somehow, despite all my precautions. I tore the apartment apart looking for cameras, found nothing, checked my clothes, my bags, everything I'd brought from my old place, clean, swept every surface with the RF detector, searched every corner and closet and vent. Nothing. No cameras, no microphones, no explanation for how he'd known about the brass key, unless he was getting inside some other way. I installed more cameras, 5 of them this time, covering every angle of my apartment, motion activated and uploading directly to cloud storage. If he came in again, I'd know. I'd see his face, capture evidence, finally have something the police could use. The cameras recorded nothing unusual for 3 nights. On the 4th night, I woke at 3 a.m. to a sound I couldn't identify. Soft, rhythmic, coming from somewhere close. Breathing. I lay frozen in my bed, listening, trying to convince myself it was the wind, the pipes, anything except what it sounded like. Then I felt the mattress shift. Someone was in my bed. Don't scream. His voice was calm, almost gentle, coming from inches away, from the darkness beside me. I just want to talk. I've been trying to get your attention for so long, and you keep running away. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, could only lie there, paralyzed, while a stranger spoke to me from my own pillow. I know everything about you now, he continued. Your schedule, your friends, your favorite coffee order. I know what you look like when you sleep, when you cry, when you think no one's watching. His hand brushed against my hair, and I felt bile rise in my throat. We're connected, you and me. We have been ever since that first day at Groundwork. You looked at me, and I knew. Knew what? That you were the one I've been waiting for. In the darkness, I heard him smile. I screamed, didn't plan to. The sound tore out of me before I could think, raw and primal, loud enough to hurt my own ears. I threw myself sideways, off the bed, hit the floor hard enough to knock the wind from my lungs. He didn't follow. I heard him sigh, heard the mattress creak as he shifted his weight, but he didn't chase me. I wish you hadn't done that, he said. Now the neighbors will call someone, and we won't have time to talk properly. I scrambled backward until I hit the wall, found the lamp on the nightstand, yanked the cord, flooded the room with light. He was sitting on my bed like he belonged there. Same man from the coffee shop. I recognized him now, even with the weeks that had passed. Average features, brown hair, the kind of face you'd forget 5 minutes after seeing it. He was wearing dark clothes, practical shoes, nothing that would stand out in a crowd. "Who are you?" My voice came out shredded, barely recognizable. "What do you want?" "I told you. I want to talk." He tilted his head, studying me with an expression that might have been curiosity or something worse. "I've been watching you for 8 months, learning everything about you, and now I finally get to have a conversation, and you're screaming. 8 months." He'd been watching me for 8 months before I ever noticed him at Groundwork. Sirens in the distance, getting closer. Someone had called the police, the neighbors maybe, or the automated alert from my security cameras. He heard them too. For the first time, something flickered across his face. Not fear, annoyance maybe. The irritation of someone whose plans were being interrupted. "I'll come back," he said, standing up from my bed. "I always come back. That's what you need to understand about us. I don't give up. I don't move on. Once I choose someone, they're mine forever." He walked toward my window, the one I'd checked, the one I'd made sure was locked, the one that now stood open to the night air. "How did you get in?" I asked. "The cameras didn't. The locks. Keys aren't the only way into a home." He paused at the window, one leg already over the sill. "Maintenance schedules, building codes, the patterns of when people check their security and when they get complacent." That smile again, empty and patient. "I've been doing this a long time. You're not my first, and you won't be my last." He disappeared into the darkness. By the time the police arrived, he was gone. But this time, he'd made a mistake. The security cameras hadn't captured him entering or leaving. He'd known exactly where they were, had moved through blind spots I hadn't even realized existed. But one camera, positioned in my bedroom to watch the door, had caught his face when I turned on the lamp. A clear image, full face, good lighting, unmistakable. The detective ran it through facial recognition the next morning. Got a hit within hours. His name was Peter Vance, 41 years old, former security consultant, currently unemployed. He'd worked for a company that installed surveillance systems, cameras, alarms, smart locks, before being let go 3 years ago for behavioral concerns that the company refused to elaborate on. "He knows security systems inside and out," the detective told me. "That's how he's been getting past everything you set up. He understands the gaps, the blind spots, the ways to defeat these things because he used to install them." "What about the other women?" I asked. He said I wasn't his first. She hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. "There have been complaints," she admitted. 3 other women in the past 5 years, all describing similar patterns. Photographed keys, hidden cameras, break-ins with no sign of forced entry. She met my eyes. 2 of them moved out of state. The third stopped returning calls about 6 months ago. "What does that mean? She moved too?" "We don't know. She's not listed as missing, but we haven't been able to locate her." The detective's face was carefully neutral. "Mr. Vance was questioned in connection with each case but never charged. No physical evidence, no witnesses, and the victims were always too frightened to pursue prosecution." Too frightened. Or something worse. I thought about the woman who'd stopped returning calls. Thought about Peter Vance telling me I was his forever, that he never gave up, never moved on. "What happened to her?" I asked. "The woman you can't find?" "I don't know, but I think you should consider leaving the city, going somewhere he can't find you. He found me when I moved across town. He found cameras I swept for, keys I never let out of my sight. How am I supposed to hide from someone like that?" The detective didn't have an answer. I spent the next week in a hotel, jumping at every sound, checking the locks every hour. The police put out a warrant for Peter Vance's arrest, but he'd vanished. No activity on his credit cards, no sightings at his apartment, no trace of him anywhere in the city. But I knew he was still watching. Could feel it in the prickle at the back of my neck, the sense of being observed that never quite went away. He was out there, waiting, patient as he'd always been. I couldn't hide, couldn't run, couldn't do anything except wait for him to make his next move. Unless I made mine first. I started researching Peter Vance, his history, his patterns. If he'd done this to other women, maybe there was something in his past that would tell me how to stop him. Some weakness I could exploit, some mistake he'd made that would give me an advantage. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. Peter Vance had a sister, Caroline, 3 years younger, who died under mysterious circumstances when she was 22. The official cause was suicide, but the police report mentioned concerns about a stalker, someone who'd been photographing her, following her, breaking into her apartment. someone she'd described to friends as a man who was obsessed with keys. Peter Vance hadn't started stalking women after his sister died. He'd started with her, and now I understood exactly what kind of monster I was dealing with. I stopped running. It sounds counterintuitive, maybe even stupid, but running hadn't worked. He'd found me when I moved across town. He'd gotten past every lock, every camera, every precaution I could think of. If I fled to another city, another state, he'd follow. He'd told me himself. He never gave up. So I decided to stop being prey. The detective thought I was crazy when I told her my plan. Maybe I was. But she also couldn't offer me any better option. No witness protection for stalking cases. No guarantee that an arrest warrant would actually lead to an arrest. Peter Vance knew how to disappear. The only way to catch him was to give him a reason to appear. I went back to my apartment, the one he'd invaded, the one where he'd sat on my bed and touched my hair. I replaced the locks again, but this time I left a window unlocked, a gap in my security, a way in that someone with his expertise would notice. I wanted him to notice. The police set up surveillance across the street. Unmarked car, 2 officers, cameras pointed at my building. They gave me a panic button that would bring backup within minutes. They told me not to engage, not to confront, just to press the button the moment I knew he was inside. I agreed to everything they said. Then I bought a knife and kept it under my pillow. 3 nights passed. I barely slept, lying in the dark with my hand on the panic button, listening for any sound that might signal his arrival. Every creak of the building made my heart race. Every shadow seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at it. On the 4th night he came. I didn't hear him enter, didn't hear footsteps or the window sliding open or any of the sounds a normal person would make. One moment I was alone in my bedroom, and the next I felt the mattress shift beneath me. "You came back." His voice was soft, almost pleased. "I knew you would. They always come back eventually. The running, the hiding. It's exhausting, isn't it? Easier to just accept what's happening." My thumb found the panic button, pressed it, held it down. "The police are coming," I said. "They're right outside. They'll be here in 2 minutes." "I know." He didn't sound concerned. "I saw them when I came in. They're watching the front entrance, the fire escape, the obvious routes. They're not watching the maintenance corridor in the basement that connects to the building next door." A soft laugh. "I told you. I understand security systems. I know all the gaps. 2 minutes." I had to keep him talking for 2 minutes. "Why do you do this?" I asked. "Why me? Why any of us?" "Because you see me." His voice was closer now. He was leaning in, speaking almost directly into my ear. "Most people look right through me. I'm invisible to them. But you, that day at the coffee shop when you caught me photographing your keys, you looked at me like I was real, like I mattered. I looked at you because you were doing something wrong. You looked at me." His hand found my shoulder, cold fingers pressing through my shirt. "That's more than most people ever do, more than my sister ever did, until the end." "What did you do to your sister?" Silence. His hand tightened on my shoulder. "She tried to leave me too. Tried to run, to hide, to pretend I didn't exist. But I don't accept that. When I choose someone, they're mine. Forever. You killed her. I set her free." His voice was dreamy now, disconnected. "She was so scared all the time, jumping at shadows, crying in corners, begging me to stop. It was cruel, making her live like that. So I gave her a choice. She could stay with me, accept what we had, or she could end the suffering. That's not a choice, that's murder." His hand moved from my shoulder to my throat, not squeezing, not yet, but resting there, feeling my pulse race beneath his palm. "It's love," he whispered, "the purest kind. When you love someone enough to give them everything, even the choice to leave forever." The sound of breaking glass came from the living room. voices shouting, flashlights cutting through the dark. Peter's hand tightened on my throat. "They won't get here in time," he said. "They never do. By the time they find us, it'll be over. One way or another." I grabbed the knife from under my pillow and drove it into his arm. He screamed, a high, startled sound, more surprise than pain, and his grip on my throat loosened. I rolled away from him, off the bed, hit the floor, and scrambled toward the door. He caught my ankle, yanked me back, hard enough that my chin cracked against the hardwood. Stars exploded across my vision as he climbed on top of me, one hand pinning my wrist, the other closing around my throat again. "You're just like her," he hissed. "You're all just like her. You pretend you don't want this, but you do. You need someone to see you, to know you, to..." The bedroom door burst open. The officers didn't hesitate. One of them tackled Peter off me while the other pulled me to safety, and then there were more people flooding into the apartment, voices shouting, lights blazing, chaos erupting everywhere at once. Peter fought them, screamed and thrashed and bit like a wild animal, had to be pinned by 3 officers before they could get cuffs on him. Even then, even restrained, even with blood dripping from the wound in his arm, he kept his eyes on me. "This isn't over," he said. His voice was calm again, eerily so. "You're mine. You'll always be mine. And someday, when they let me out, and they always let us out eventually, I'll find you again." They dragged him away. The apartment fell quiet, except for the crackle of police radios and the distant wail of approaching sirens. I sat on my living room floor, bruises blooming on my throat, and wondered if he was right. If this would ever really be over. Peter Vance went to trial 4 months later. I testified for 3 hours, describing everything: the coffee shop, the cameras in my purse, the nights he'd spent in my apartment while I slept. The prosecution brought in the other women too, the ones who'd filed complaints and then gone silent. They weren't silent anymore. One by one, they told their stories, painted a picture of a predator who had been operating for years, perfecting his techniques, learning from each victim how to become more invisible. The jury convicted him on 12 counts: stalking, breaking and entering, assault, unlawful surveillance. The judge called him a clear and present danger to society and sentenced him to 18 years. 18 years. It sounded like a long time. It sounded like safety. But Peter had been right about one thing. They always let them out eventually. With good behavior, he could be free in 12, maybe less. And I'd seen his face when they led him out of the courtroom. That patient smile, those empty eyes fixed on mine. He wasn't scared of prison. He was just waiting. I moved anyway. Left the city, left my job, left everything I'd built and started over somewhere new. A small town on the coast, where the air smelled like salt and the neighbors actually knew each other's names. I rented a cottage with no basement, no maintenance corridors, no gaps in security that a former consultant might exploit. I changed my locks every 6 months, swept for cameras every week, never let my keys out of my sight, never set them on a counter or a table, never gave anyone a chance to photograph them again. Paranoid? Maybe. But paranoia was what had saved my life. Paranoia was what had made me notice the man at groundwork, the cameras in my purse, the window I'd felt compelled to leave unlocked. I'd learned to trust the fear, to let it guide me through a world that suddenly felt full of predators. The first year passed without incident, then the second. I started sleeping through the night again, started leaving my house without checking every shadow, started to believe that maybe I'd actually escaped. Then I got the letter. No return address, no postmark, just my name written on the envelope in handwriting I didn't recognize. I almost threw it away, unopened, almost convinced myself it was junk mail, a misdirected notice, anything except what I knew it was. But I opened it anyway, because not knowing was worse than knowing, because the fear of what might be inside was worse than actually seeing it. Inside was a photograph, my cottage. taken from across the street at night, with my living room window glowing warm and yellow in the darkness. I could see myself inside, just a silhouette, a suggestion of a figure moving through the space, but it was unmistakably me. On the back of the photograph, in careful block letters, "Thinking of you, see you soon." I called the prison that morning, asked to confirm that Peter Vance was still incarcerated, still locked away where he couldn't hurt anyone. He was. Maximum security, no early release, no special privileges. He'd been in solitary for the past 3 months after attacking another inmate. "There's no way he could have sent this?" I asked. "No way," the administrator assured me. "His mail is monitored. He hasn't sent anything to anyone outside the facility in over a year." So it wasn't Peter, which meant it was someone else. I thought about what the detective had told me back when this all started. How Peter had worked for a company that installed security systems. How he'd been let go for behavioral concerns that no one would explain. I called the company. Got transferred 3 times before I reached someone willing to talk. "Peter Vance?" The HR director's voice was careful, guarded. "I can't discuss former employees in detail, but I can tell you that he wasn't the only one let go during that period. There were concerns about a culture that had developed, a group of employees who were sharing information they shouldn't have been sharing." "What kind of information?" "Client information, access codes, security layouts, personal data." A long pause. "We reported it to the authorities, but nothing ever came of it. The employees scattered, covered their tracks. We don't know what happened to most of them. A group, not just Peter, a whole network of people who had learned the same skills, developed the same obsessions, shared the same techniques for turning security systems into tools for surveillance. I don't know how many of them are out there. Don't know if the photograph came from one of Peter's former colleagues, or someone he'd trained, or someone who had simply learned from his example. The forums I'd found when researching key duplication, they're still active, still full of people discussing techniques, sharing tips, treating invasion of privacy like a hobby. Peter Vance is in prison, but the thing he represented, the predator who hides in the gaps, who turns your own security against you, that's still out there. Maybe it always was. Maybe I just never noticed until someone tried to photograph my keys. I still live in the cottage by the coast. Still change my locks, sweep for cameras, keep my keys hidden against my body where no lens can reach them. I've accepted that this is my life now. Constant vigilance, permanent awareness, the understanding that safety is an illusion we construct to help ourselves sleep at night. Some nights, I see cars parked on my street that I don't recognize. Figures walking past my house who seem to linger just a moment too long. Reflections in windows that might be watching or might be nothing at all. I never know for certain. That's the worst part. But I've learned something in the years since Peter Vance sat on my bed and told me I was his forever. I've learned that fear isn't weakness, that paranoia isn't madness, that the people who survive are the ones who pay attention to the small things, the stranger with a phone at the coffee shop, the doorknob that's shinier than it should be, the feeling that someone is watching when you're supposed to be alone. Pay attention, watch your keys, and if you ever catch someone photographing them, don't convince yourself you imagined it. Run. Because by the time you're sure something is wrong, it's already too late. I know. I was almost too late. And somewhere out there, someone is learning everything about you right now, one photograph at a time. Story 4. The museum guide who walked into a wall. She didn't stop when she reached the wall. That's the part I keep coming back to, the detail that refuses to make sense no matter how many times I replay it in my mind. She was walking toward me, speaking in that rehearsed cadence tour guides use, and when she reached the wall at the end of the corridor, she just kept going. Walked into the plaster like it was a doorway, like the solid surface was nothing but a suggestion, and disappeared. I stood there for almost a minute, waiting for her to come back, waiting for someone to jump out and tell me I'd been pranked, that there was a hidden door, or a projection, or some rational explanation for what I'd just witnessed. No one came. The wall stayed solid, and I was alone in a museum that suddenly felt much older and much stranger than it had 5 minutes before. I should back up. My name is Thomas, I'm 34, and I was visiting the Hartwell Museum of Regional History on a Thursday afternoon in late October because I had nothing better to do. I'd been laid off from my accounting job 3 weeks earlier, and the unemployment had started to curdle into something darker, days that blurred together, nights that stretched too long, a growing sense that I was becoming invisible to the world. The museum seemed like a way to feel human again, to exist in a space designed for people instead of the echo chamber of my apartment. The Hartwell wasn't much to look at, a converted Victorian mansion on the edge of downtown, filled with artifacts from the region's history, Native American pottery, colonial furniture, photographs of people who'd been dead for a century, the kind of small-town museum that survived on grants and field trip revenue, staffed by elderly volunteers and 1 or 2 actual employees. I was the only visitor that afternoon. The woman at the front desk had seemed surprised to see me, had fumbled with the ticket machine like she'd forgotten how it worked. She told me the guided tour would start in 10 minutes, that the guide would meet me in the East Wing. I wandered until I found the East Wing, a long corridor lined with display cases, dimly lit, smelling of dust and old wood. At the far end was a wall with a large painting, a landscape of the valley as it had looked 200 years ago, all rolling hills and untouched forest. The guide appeared from a side door I hadn't noticed. A woman, maybe 60, wearing a navy blazer with the museum's logo embroidered on the pocket. Her hair was gray, pulled back in a severe bun, and she moved with the careful precision of someone who had walked these halls 1,000 times. "Welcome to the Hartwell Museum," she said. Her voice was pleasant, but distant, like she was reciting from a script she'd memorized so long ago it had become automatic. "I'll be your guide this afternoon. Please follow me." She didn't wait for a response, just turned and began walking down the corridor, speaking as she went. The Hartwell Mansion was built in 1887 by Cornelius Hartwell, a shipping magnate who made his fortune in the lumber trade. The house remained in the family until 1952, when the last surviving Hartwell, Eleanor, Cornelius's granddaughter, donated the property to the city. I followed, half listening, more interested in the artifacts than the history, a collection of antique medical instruments, a dress that had supposedly been worn to Lincoln's inauguration, a taxidermied owl that watched me with glass eyes as I passed. "Eleanor never married," the guide continued. "She lived alone in this house for almost 40 years, maintaining it exactly as her grandfather had left it. Some say she was waiting for someone. Others say she was hiding from something." We'd reached the end of the corridor. The painting of the valley filled the wall in front of us, larger than I'd realized from a distance. The guide stopped, and I stopped behind her, expecting her to turn and lead us in another direction. She didn't turn. "Eleanor died in 1951, she said. 1 year before the museum opened. They found her in the East Wing, standing in front of this very wall." She took a step forward. She was facing the painting when they found her, facing it like she could see something in it that no one else could see. Another step. She was almost touching the wall now. They say her last words were, "The door is finally open." And then she walked into the wall and vanished. I don't mean she stepped through a hidden door. I don't mean she triggered some mechanism that made the wall swing open. I mean she walked into solid plaster and the surface rippled around her like water, and then she was gone and the wall was solid again. I ran to it, pressed my hands against the surface, feeling for a seam, a switch, anything that might explain what I'd just seen. The wall was cool and smooth and completely ordinary. The painting stared back at me, those rolling hills, that untouched forest, a landscape from a time before this building existed. "Hello?" My voice echoed in the empty corridor. "Is anyone there?" No answer. Just the hum of the climate control system and the distant creak of an old house settling. I went back to the front desk. The woman who'd sold me my ticket was gone. Her chair empty, her computer dark. No sign that anyone had been there at all. I checked my watch. I'd been in the museum for maybe 20 minutes, but the light coming through the windows looked different, darker, later. I tried the front door. Locked. I was alone in the Hartwell Museum, and somewhere behind me, past a wall that wasn't quite solid, a tour guide was waiting for me to follow. I tried every exit I could find. The front door, the emergency exits, the windows that looked out onto a street I could see but not reach. Everything was locked, sealed, immovable. I pounded on the glass until my hands ached, shouted until my voice went hoarse, but no one on the street seemed to hear me. People walked past without glancing up, without acknowledging the man trapped inside the building they were passing. It was like I wasn't there at all. By the time I gave up on escape, the light outside had faded to twilight. I checked my phone. No signal, no Wi-Fi, battery draining faster than it should. The timestamp said 4:47 p.m., but when I looked out the window, the darkness suggested something closer to midnight. Time was wrong here. Or I was wrong. Or everything was wrong in ways I couldn't understand. I explored the museum, looking for another way out, another person, anything that might help me make sense of what was happening. The rooms I'd passed through on my way to the East Wing looked different now. The displays had changed, not dramatically, but enough to notice. A dress that had been blue was now black. A portrait that had shown an old man now showed a young woman with hollow eyes. The taxidermied owl had moved, I was certain of it, repositioned to watch a different angle of the room. And everywhere I went, I found photographs of Eleanor Hartwell. She'd been beautiful once, in that severe Victorian way. Dark hair, sharp features, a mouth that suggested she rarely smiled. The photos showed her aging, year by year, decade by decade. A young woman in a white dress, a middle-aged spinster in mourning black, an old woman standing alone in rooms that I recognized, rooms I was walking through right now. In every photograph, no matter her age, she was looking at the same thing, the wall at the end of the East Wing, the painting of the valley, the door that wasn't a door until it was. I found a journal in the library, leather-bound, handwritten, dated 1948. Eleanor's diary, left open on a reading table like someone had been studying it recently. I sat down and read. The wall spoke to me again last night. I know how that sounds. I know what people would say if I told them. But it's true. I hear voices from the other side, voices calling my name, telling me about a place where time doesn't pass and nothing ever dies. They say I can join them if I'm patient. If I wait long enough, the door will open, and I can step through into forever. I turn the page. I've been waiting for 30 years. The voices come every night now, stronger than before. They show me visions of the place beyond the wall, a valley, green and untouched, exactly like the painting grandfather hung to cover the threshold. He knew about the door. He built this house around it, tried to seal it with brick and mortar and art. But doors want to be opened, and this one has been calling to me since I was a child. The next entry was dated 3 years later. I'm dying. The doctors don't know what's wrong. They never do with afflictions of this kind. But I know. The door is pulling at me, draining my life force, demanding that I give myself to it completely. Soon I won't have a choice. Soon I'll walk through whether I want to or not. The final entry was from the day before Eleanor's death. The door opened tonight, just for a moment, just long enough for me to see what's on the other side. It's not a valley. It was never a valley. The painting is a lie, a comfort grandfather created to hide the truth. What's beyond that wall is nothing, an emptiness so vast it makes the universe look small. And the voices aren't welcoming me. They're hungry. They've been hungry for so long, and I've been feeding them my entire life without knowing it. The last line was written in handwriting that shook, "Don't follow. Whatever happens, don't follow." I closed the journal. The museum had gone completely dark while I was reading. No emergency lights, no glow from the street outside, nothing but absolute blackness pressing in from every direction. I fumbled for my phone, found it dead, battery drained to zero even though it had been half full minutes ago. In the darkness, I heard footsteps, measured, deliberate, the sound of hard shoes on hardwood floors coming from somewhere deeper in the building, getting closer. "Mr. Thomas?" The tour guide's voice, pleasant and distant, echoing through rooms I couldn't see. "The tour isn't over. There's still so much to show you." I pressed myself against the wall, held my breath, tried to become invisible in the darkness. Eleanor waited her whole life for the door to open. Decades of patience, decades of feeding the emptiness with her attention, her fear, her loneliness. The footsteps were in the library now, close, too close. "But you're a gift, someone who wandered in without knowing, without the years of preparation. The emptiness is so hungry, Mr. Thomas, and you have so much life left to give." A hand touched my shoulder. Cold. So cold it burned through my shirt, through my skin, all the way down to bone. "Come," the guide whispered. "Let me show you what's behind the wall." And despite every instinct screaming at me to resist, I felt my legs begin to move, walking toward the east wing, walking toward the door that Eleanor had warned me about, walking toward nothing. I couldn't stop my feet from moving. It was like being a passenger in my own body, watching from somewhere behind my eyes as my legs carried me through the darkened museum. The guide walked beside me, her hand still resting on my shoulder, her touch so cold it had numbed the entire left side of my body. "You're wondering why you can't resist," she said. Her voice was conversational, almost kind. "It's because part of you doesn't want to. Part of you has been waiting for this your whole life. The emptiness, the quiet, the end of all the noise and struggle. You've felt it, haven't you? That pull toward nothing. I had. In the weeks since losing my job, in the gray hours between sleeping and waking, I'd felt exactly what she described. A longing for silence, a desire to simply stop existing. The museum knew. Whatever lived behind that wall, it had sensed my despair from miles away, had drawn me here like a moth to a flame that would consume rather than illuminate. We reached the east wing. The corridor stretched before us, longer than I remembered, the display cases empty now, their contents vanished into whatever darkness had swallowed the rest of the building. At the far end, the painting of the valley glowed with its own light, soft and green and impossibly inviting. Cornelius Hartwell found the door in 1885, the guide said as we walked. He was surveying land for his lumber business when he stumbled into a clearing that shouldn't have existed. A perfect circle of dead grass, and at its center, a hole in the world. Not a cave, not a pit. A hole in reality itself, leading somewhere, or somewhen, that human minds aren't built to comprehend. We were halfway down the corridor now. The painting seemed to pulse, its colors shifting, the hills rolling like waves on a frozen sea. He should have left it alone, should have walked away and never looked back. But Cornelius was a businessman, and businessmen see opportunity in everything. Her grip on my shoulder tightened. He built his house around the door, covered it with brick, with plaster, with that painting he commissioned from an artist who went mad before completing it. He thought he could contain it, control it, use it. Use it for what? Power, longevity, the things men always want. She laughed, a dry, hollow sound. The emptiness granted his wishes in a way. He lived to 93, far longer than anyone in his family had before. But every year, someone had to feed the door. A servant who disappeared. A visitor who was never seen again. The emptiness demands tribute, and Cornelius paid it gladly. We'd reached the wall. The painting loomed above me, massive, filling my vision with green hills and blue sky and a world that looked like paradise. But I could see through it now. Behind the painted canvas, behind the plaster and brick that Cornelius had used to seal the threshold, something moved. Not a shape, the absence of shape. Not darkness, the absence of light. A void that made my eyes water just from looking at it, that made my brain itch as it tried to process something it was never designed to perceive. Eleanor fed it for 40 years, the guide continued. Her attention, her fear, her loneliness, all of it flowing through the wall, keeping the emptiness satisfied. But she wasn't enough. She was never enough. The door needs more. It always needs more. The painting began to ripple. The same effect I'd seen when the guide walked through, the surface becoming liquid, permeable, a membrane between this world and whatever waited beyond. And now it has you. She pushed me forward. I stumbled, caught myself with my hands against the wall, except it wasn't a wall anymore. My fingers sank into something that felt like cold gelatin, like the skin of a dead thing left too long in water. The sensation traveled up my arms, into my chest, pulling at something deep inside me. I screamed. The emptiness screamed back. Not a sound, a feeling, a vast, ancient hunger that had been waiting in the dark since before the first star ignited. It showed me things, the universe as a brief flicker of light in an eternity of nothing. Every life that had ever existed as a spark quickly extinguished. The heat death of all creation as not an ending, but a return to the natural state of absolute zero, absolute silence, absolute void. And at the center of that vision, I saw the others. The people who had fed the door before me, servants in Victorian clothing, their faces frozen in expressions of eternal terror. Visitors from decades past, still wearing the fashions of their era, still reaching toward a light that had gone out long ago. Eleanor herself, young again but hollow, her eyes empty pits that reflected nothing because there was nothing left inside her to reflect. They were part of the emptiness now, digested, absorbed, their consciousness preserved just enough to feel hunger, to feel the endless aching need that drove the void to consume. And they were reaching for me. Hands emerged from the rippling wall, gray, translucent, cold as the spaces between galaxies. They grabbed my wrists, my arms, my shoulders, pulled me deeper into the membrane, into the threshold between existence and oblivion. "Don't fight it," the guide whispered. She was behind me now, pushing, helping the hands drag me through. Fighting only makes it worse. Eleanor fought for hours before she finally let go. You can spare yourself that pain. I was up to my chest in the wall. The cold had spread through my entire body, numbing everything, making it hard to think, hard to remember why I should resist. Part of me wanted to let go. Part of me had always wanted to let go. But another part, the part that had gotten up this morning, that had chosen to visit a museum instead of staying in bed, that had kept moving even when everything felt pointless, that part refused to surrender. I thought of Eleanor's final warning. "Don't follow," and I started to fight. I threw my weight backward. The hands gripping me tightened, their cold fingers digging into my flesh, but I didn't stop. I twisted, thrashed, kicked against the membrane that was trying to swallow me whole. The emptiness shrieked, that silent scream of frustrated hunger, and for just a moment, its grip loosened. I tore one arm free. "Stop." The guide's voice had changed, no longer pleasant, no longer distant. Something raw and desperate underneath, something that sounded almost afraid. "You can't escape. No one escapes. The door has been fed for over a century, and it will not be denied." I grabbed the edge of the painting's frame with my free hand. The wood was old, brittle, and when I pulled, it cracked. The sound echoed through the corridor like a gunshot, and the membrane around me shuddered. "What are you doing?" The guide grabbed my arm, tried to pry my fingers loose. "Stop! You'll break the seal!" The seal. Cornelius hadn't just covered the door. He'd contained it. The painting wasn't just concealment. It was a barrier, a cage, something that kept the emptiness from spreading beyond this single threshold. I pulled harder. The frame splintered. The canvas tore. And behind it, I saw the wall. Not the void, but actual brick. The original construction Cornelius had used to build his prison around the hole in reality. The bricks were covered in symbols carved deep into the clay, glowing faint red like embers that had never quite died. The membrane convulsed. The hands holding me spasmed, their grip weakening as the emptiness recoiled from the exposed symbols. I felt the cold recede from my chest, my shoulders, my arms. I pulled myself out, fell backward onto the hardwood floor, gasping, shaking, every nerve in my body screaming. The guide stood over me, her face twisted into something that barely resembled human anymore. Features stretched wrong, eyes too wide, mouth open in a silent howl of rage. "You've damaged it," she hissed. "Decades of careful feeding, and you've damaged the containment." Behind her, the wall was changing. The symbols on the bricks flared brighter, casting red light across the corridor. The membrane that had tried to consume me was pulling back, retreating, shrinking toward a single point at the center of the wall. The door was closing. No. The guide turned toward the wall, reaching for the shrinking membrane. No. I've waited so long. I fed it so faithfully. I was supposed to go through. I was supposed to join them. I understood then. She wasn't a lure. She wasn't a trap. She was a supplicant, someone who had served the emptiness for years, hoping to earn the reward of oblivion. She wanted to be consumed, wanted to join the hollow congregation on the other side. And I had taken that from her. The membrane shrank to the size of a dinner plate, a basketball, a fist. The guide threw herself at the wall, pressing her hands against the symbols, trying to reach the void before it closed completely. The bricks flared white-hot, and she screamed, a real scream this time, full of pain and loss and decades of wasted devotion. When she pulled her hands back, they were blackened, burned to the bone, and the membrane was gone. The wall was just a wall again, brick and plaster, and the torn remnants of a painting that had hidden something terrible for over 100 years. The guide collapsed. She lay on the floor, cradling her ruined hands, making sounds that weren't quite words. I should have felt pity, should have felt something other than the cold horror still seeping through my veins. But all I could do was stare at her, this woman who had tried to feed me to an ancient hunger, and wonder how many others she'd guided down this corridor. "How long?" I asked. My voice was hoarse, barely recognizable. "How long have you been doing this?" She looked up at me. The inhumanity had drained from her features, leaving something older, sadder. Just a woman in a navy blazer, burned and broken on the floor of a museum no one visited. "Since Eleanor died," she whispered. "I was her nurse at the end. She told me about the door, about what waited on the other side. She warned me to stay away, but I didn't listen." A sound that might have been a laugh. I fed it 37 people, drifters, tourists, anyone who wandered in alone. I thought if I gave it enough, it would let me through. I thought I could earn my way into the nothing. Why would anyone want that? Because the nothing doesn't hurt. Tears were streaming down her face, cutting tracks through the dust and age. Because the nothing is quiet. Because I've been alive for so long, and I'm so tired, and I just wanted it to end. The lights came back on. All at once, like someone had flipped a switch, the museum flooded with illumination. I heard sounds from elsewhere in the building. Footsteps, voices, the ordinary noises of a place returning to normal operation. The guide was gone. Not dead, just gone. vanished in the moment between darkness and light, leaving nothing behind except the smell of burned flesh and the echo of her final words. I stood in the East Wing, alone, surrounded by display cases that held ordinary artifacts and walls that were just walls. The torn painting lay on the floor, canvas shredded, frame splintered. Behind it, the bricks had gone dark, their symbols faded to barely visible scratches. The door was closed. Maybe forever, maybe just for now. I had no way of knowing. But I knew I couldn't stay here. I walked through the museum on legs that barely held me, found the front entrance unlocked, the street outside bright with afternoon sun, the world continuing as if nothing had happened, as if I hadn't almost been devoured by something older than time. I stepped outside and didn't look back. The Hartwell Museum closed permanently 3 weeks later. I read about it in the local paper, a small article buried in the community section, noting that the board of directors had voted to shutter the facility due to structural concerns. The building would be demolished, the artifacts donated to larger institutions, the land sold to developers who planned to build condominiums on the site. No mention of a tour guide, no mention of a door, no mention of the 37 people who had walked into that building over the decades and never walked out. I tried to find records of them, spent weeks in libraries and archives, searching for missing persons reports, obituaries, any trace of the drifters and tourists the guide had fed to the emptiness. Found almost nothing. A few names that might have matched, a few disappearances that remained unsolved. But most of them had simply vanished from history, unmourned and unremembered, their lives erased as completely as if they'd never existed. Maybe that was the point. Maybe that was what the emptiness did. Not just consumed bodies, but consumed meaning. Made it so you'd never been, so no one would come looking, so the feeding could continue forever without interruption. I went back to the museum once, before the demolition, stood across the street and watched the windows, looking for movement, looking for any sign that something still waited inside. The building looked ordinary, just an old Victorian mansion, weathered and tired, ready to be torn down. But as I watched, I saw something in one of the upper windows. A flicker of motion, a suggestion of a figure, there and gone so quickly. I couldn't be sure I'd seen anything at all. Then the curtain moved, pulled aside, just for a moment by a hand I couldn't see. I left before anything else could happen. The demolition was completed in January. I watched from a safe distance as the wrecking ball swung through walls that had contained something terrible for over a century. The building came down in stages, roof first, then upper floors, then the ground level with its displays and corridors and that wall at the end of the East Wing. When they cleared the rubble, they found something strange. The newspaper mentioned it briefly, dismissing it as an architectural oddity. Beneath the foundation, workers had discovered a circular pit, about 10 feet across, perfectly smooth, descending into the earth at an angle that made it impossible to see the bottom. Engineers theorized it was an old well, or perhaps a root cellar that had been forgotten. They filled it with concrete, poured tons of it into that hole, sealed it up, built their condominiums on top like nothing had ever been wrong. I know what that pit was. I know what waited at the bottom, patient and hungry, temporarily sealed but not destroyed. The emptiness hadn't been in the wall. It had been beneath the house, and Cornelius had built his mansion directly over it, using the painting and the symbols to redirect its hunger, to create a controlled point of access. Now that access point was gone. The symbols were destroyed, the containment shattered. I don't know what that means for the people who live in those condominiums. Don't know if the concrete will hold, if the emptiness will find a new way to reach out, if the door will open again somewhere else. But I know that something ancient and vast is still down there, still waiting, still hungry after being denied its meal. I think about it every day, not in a dramatic way. I don't have nightmares, don't wake up screaming, don't flinch at shadows or avoid museums. The horror of what I experienced has settled into something quieter, a background awareness, like a sound just below the threshold of hearing, always present even when I'm not paying attention. I know things now that I can't unknow. I've seen the end of everything, not metaphorically, not philosophically, but literally. I've looked into the void that exists beneath reality, the emptiness that will swallow the universe when the last star burns out, and I've understood that all of existence is just a temporary interruption in an eternity of nothing. That knowledge changes you, makes it hard to care about the small things, jobs, money, the ordinary struggles that used to feel important. But it also makes it easier to appreciate the brief flicker of light we've been given. Every sunrise feels like a miracle now. Every conversation, every meal, every moment of connection with another human being feels precious in a way it never did before. The guide wanted oblivion because she was tired of pain. I understand that impulse better than I'd like to admit. But I've decided that the pain is worth it. The struggle, the noise, the chaos of being alive. All of it is worth it because the alternative is nothing, and nothing, I've learned, is hungrier than it looks. I got a new job last month. Started seeing a therapist who doesn't know the real reason I was depressed, who attributes my recovery to medication and cognitive behavioral techniques. I've reconnected with old friends, started exercising, begun to build a life that looks something like normal from the outside. But sometimes late at night, I catch myself staring at walls. Not because I think something is behind them, just because I remember what it felt like to pass through, to feel that cold membrane close around me, to glimpse the faces of everyone who'd been consumed before. They're still in there, still aware, still hungry, still reaching for anyone who comes too close. Eleanor, the servants, the tourists, the 37 victims the guide had collected over decades. All of them preserved in the emptiness, conscious enough to suffer, trapped forever in a hunger they can never satisfy. That's what waits for all of us, I think. Not heaven, not hell, just the nothing, patient and eternal, ready to welcome us home when the light finally goes out. I try not to think about it too often, but every time I walk into a building I've never been in before, every time I see a wall that seems slightly wrong, every time a tour guide approaches me with a pleasant smile and distant eyes, I remember. Some doors aren't meant to be opened, some tours aren't meant to be taken, and some walls lead to places where even the concept of escape has no meaning. I survived the Hartwell Museum, but part of me is still there, standing at the threshold, feeling the cold hands pull me toward forever. And sometimes, in the quiet moments just before sleep, I can still hear the emptiness calling my name, waiting for me to follow. Story 5. The man standing at the edge of my driveway every night. He never stepped onto my property. That was the thing that made it impossible to report, impossible to explain to anyone who hadn't seen it themselves. He just stood there every night, right at the edge where my driveway met the street, feet planted on public pavement, hands at his sides, face turned toward my house, watching. I first noticed him on a Tuesday in November. I'd gotten up around 2 a.m. for a glass of water, walked past the front window on my way to the kitchen, and saw him standing in the glow of the streetlight. Just a silhouette at first. A man-shaped darkness at the end of my driveway, motionless as a fence post. I assumed he was waiting for someone, a rideshare, maybe, or a friend who lived nearby. I got my water, went back to bed, didn't think about him again until the next night. Same time, same place, same absolute stillness. I'm 41, divorced, living alone in a house I bought 3 years ago when my marriage fell apart and I needed proof that I could build something on my own. It's a nice house, 3 bedrooms, detached garage, a yard that I've slowly been learning to maintain. The neighborhood is quiet, the kind of place where people wave from their porches and complain about property taxes. Safe. Normal. At least it was. By the third night, I knew something was wrong. No one waits at the edge of a stranger's driveway at 2 a.m. 3 nights in a row. No one stands that still for that long without moving, without checking a phone, without showing any of the small human behaviors that prove a person is real. I turned on the porch light. The sudden illumination should have startled him, should have prompted some reaction. He didn't move, just stood there, face still turned toward my house, eyes I couldn't see fixed on windows I was hiding behind. I called the police. They sent an officer who drove by, saw nothing. The man had vanished before the patrol car turned onto my street, and took a report with the kind of polite skepticism that told me exactly how seriously they were taking it. Could be someone from the neighborhood, he suggested, taking a late walk, stopped to check directions on his phone. He wasn't checking his phone. He wasn't doing anything except staring at my house. The officer nodded, made a note, promised to increase patrols in the area. I knew nothing would come of it. I started keeping a log, time, duration, any details I could make out from my window. The man appeared sometime between 1:30 and 2:15 every night, always at the exact same spot, always facing my house. He wore dark clothes, a coat, I thought, though it was hard to tell in the dim light. His hair was short, his build average, his features impossible to distinguish from 30 feet away through window glass. He never moved while I watched, never shifted his weight, never turned his head, never showed any sign that he knew I was observing him. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he was aware of me, that my attention was exactly what he wanted. I bought cameras, installed them myself, one on the porch and one in the garage, both pointed at the end of the driveway. That night, I watched the live feed on my phone instead of standing at the window. Watched him appear at 1:47 a.m., stepping into frame from the left side, taking his position at the edge of my property. For 3 hours, he didn't move. I zoomed in, trying to see his face. The resolution wasn't good enough, just a blur of features, pale skin and dark spots where his eyes should be. But I could see enough to know he wasn't normal. No one stands for 3 hours without shifting, without blinking, without showing any evidence of the small, involuntary movements that prove a body is alive. At 4:52 a.m., he turned and walked away, the first movement I'd ever seen him make. I watched him on the camera until he disappeared around the corner at the end of my street, and then I sat in the dark and waited for dawn. My neighbor Dave stopped by that afternoon. Retired, friendly, the kind of guy who knows everyone's business and considers it a public service. "Saw your cameras went up," he said. "Everything okay?" I told him about the man, watched his expression shift from curiosity to concern to something I couldn't quite read. "Standing at your driveway? Every night?" "For almost 2 weeks now. The police won't do anything because he's technically on public property." Dave was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that made my blood go cold. The Hendersons had the same problem before they moved. Said there was a man who stood at the edge of their driveway every night just watching. Drove them crazy trying to figure out who he was. When was this? About 4 years ago. Right before... He stopped himself, looked uncomfortable. Right before what? Right before Karen Henderson disappeared. He wouldn't meet my eyes. They found her car at the grocery store, engine still running, door hanging open. Never found her. Frank sold the house 6 months later, moved across the country. Couldn't stand to be here anymore. I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. The man at the driveway. Did they ever figure out who he was? Dave shook his head. Police investigated, but there was no evidence connecting him to anything. Just a guy standing on public property. No law against that. He finally looked at me, and I saw fear in his eyes, not for himself, but for me. "Be careful, Sarah. Whatever this is, whatever he wants, be careful." That night, I didn't sleep. Just sat in my living room with every light on, watching the camera feed, waiting for him to appear. He came at 2:03 a.m. But this time, he wasn't at the edge of the driveway. He was standing on my lawn, 10 feet closer than he'd ever been before. And for the first time, I could see his face clearly. He was smiling. I called the police again. This time he was on my property. Trespassing, finally, something they could act on. The dispatcher promised to send a unit immediately. He was gone before they arrived. Stepped off my lawn at 2:31 a.m., retreated to the street, walked away in that slow, deliberate pace I'd seen on the camera footage. By the time the patrol car pulled up, there was no evidence he'd ever been there except the recording on my phone and the racing of my heart. The officers watched the footage. I saw their expressions change when they noticed how still he stood, how long he remained motionless, how his smile seemed to widen slightly as the minutes passed. "We'll increase patrols," one of them said. The same promise, the same words that meant nothing. "He's getting closer. Every night he's closer to my house. If he comes onto your property again, call us immediately. We'll try to respond faster." They left. I sat in my kitchen until the sun came up, drinking coffee I didn't taste, watching the empty driveway through my window. The next night, he was on my porch. I saw him appear on the camera at 1:58 a.m., not walking up the driveway, not crossing the lawn. One frame he wasn't there, and the next frame he was. Standing on my porch, face inches from my front door, that smile frozen on features I could finally see clearly. He looked ordinary. That was the worst part. Middle-aged, clean-shaven, the kind of face you'd see in a grocery store and forget 5 seconds later. Nothing monstrous, nothing obviously wrong. Just a man, standing at my door in the middle of the night, smiling like he knew a secret I didn't. I didn't call the police this time. Knew they wouldn't arrive in time. Knew he'd be gone before anyone could help. Instead, I sat in my bedroom with the door locked and a kitchen knife in my hand, watching the feed on my phone, waiting for him to leave. He stayed until 4:47 a.m., almost 3 hours, standing at my door, never moving, never blinking, never doing anything except smiling at a door that separated him from me by less than 2 inches of wood. Then he turned and walked away, and I finally let myself breathe. I couldn't live like this. Couldn't spend every night waiting for him to appear, wondering how much closer he'd get, how long until he stopped leaving before dawn. I needed answers. I started with Karen Henderson. The local library had newspaper archives going back decades. I found the articles about her disappearance. A 38-year-old woman vanished from a grocery store parking lot in broad daylight. No witnesses, no suspects, no leads. The police had investigated for months before the case went cold. Her husband, Frank, had been questioned and cleared. The community had held vigils and posted flyers and eventually, inevitably, moved on. But buried in one of the later articles, I found something that stopped my heart. A neighbor, not Dave, someone else, had mentioned seeing a man standing at the edge of the Hendersons' driveway in the weeks before Karen vanished. The police had followed up, found nothing, dismissed it as unrelated. I dug deeper, searched for other disappearances in the area, other unsolved cases, other mentions of a man who watched from the edges of properties he never quite entered. I found 3 more. Linda Marsh, 1987, vanished from her home 2 miles away, never found. A co-worker had mentioned that Linda complained about someone watching her house at night. Robert Crane, 1994. Disappeared while jogging in the neighborhood, body never recovered. His wife told police he'd been anxious for weeks, convinced someone was following him. Denise Okafor, 2011. Left for work one morning and never arrived. Her teenage daughter reported seeing a man standing at the end of their driveway the night before. 4 people. 4 disappearances spanning almost 40 years, all within a 2-mile radius of my house. And all of them had seen the man before they vanished. I took my research to the police, showed them the articles, the pattern, the connection between the cases. Detective Morrison, the same one who'd taken my initial report, listened with increasing discomfort. These cases were all investigated, she said. There was never any evidence linking them. The man at the driveway, every single victim reported seeing him. Reported seeing someone. Different descriptions, different time frames, no proof it was the same person. She leaned forward. Miss Chen, I understand you're scared, but what you're describing, a supernatural stalker who's been hunting people for 40 years, that's not something I can investigate. Then what can you do? She didn't have an answer. I went home as the sun was setting, knowing he'd be back tonight, knowing he'd be closer still. I checked every lock, every window, every possible point of entry, moved a bookshelf in front of the door he'd been standing at, sat in the center of my house with my phone in one hand and the knife in the other. At 1:43 a.m., my phone buzzed. Motion detected. Backyard camera. I pulled up the feed with shaking fingers. He was at my back door now. Not the front, the back, the entrance I hadn't barricaded. The door that led directly into my kitchen. He wasn't smiling anymore. He was pressing his face against the glass, breath fogging the window, eyes fixed on the camera like he knew I was watching. And then he raised one hand and placed it flat against the door. On my phone, I watched his fingers curl, slowly, deliberately, testing the handle, seeing if it would open. The handle turned. I'd locked it. I was certain I'd locked it. Had checked every door twice, 3 times, had rattled each knob to make sure the deadbolt was engaged. But on my phone screen, I watched the handle rotate, watched the door begin to swing inward, watched the darkness of my backyard spill into the darkness of my kitchen. I screamed. The sound tore out of me before I could think, raw and primal, loud enough to hurt my own throat. I was on my feet and running before I consciously decided to move, sprinting for the front door, for the barricade I'd built, for any escape from the thing that was entering my home. Behind me, I heard footsteps, slow, measured. The same deliberate pace he used when walking away at dawn, now carrying him through my kitchen, my hallway, toward the living room where I was shoving the bookshelf aside with strength I didn't know I had. The front door opened. I was outside, barefoot on cold concrete, running down my driveway toward the streetlight, the neighbors, anywhere that wasn't alone with whatever had been watching me for weeks. I made it to Dave's house, pounded on his door until lights came on, until his confused face appeared in the window, until he opened up and I collapsed inside, sobbing, trying to explain what had happened. He called the police. They searched my house, found the back door standing open, found no sign of an intruder. The cameras had stopped recording the moment the door opened, all of them simultaneously, as if something had reached out and switched them off. "There's no one here," the officer told me. The same words, the same useless assurance. "Whatever you saw, they're gone now." I didn't go back that night, stayed at Dave's, curled on his couch, watching the window for any sign of the man who had finally crossed the threshold into my home. He didn't appear. For the first time in weeks, the edge of my driveway stayed empty. But I knew it wasn't over. He'd gotten inside. He'd walked through my house, breathed my air, existed in my space. Whatever barrier had kept him at the edge of my property, whatever rule had prevented him from entering, I'd broken it somehow. Invited him in without meaning to. I spent the next day researching. Not the disappearances this time, but the house itself. Property records, previous owners, anything that might explain why this was happening here, to the people who lived in this specific place. The house was built in 1952, first owners, Harold and Margaret Dunn, who lived there until Harold's death in 1978. Margaret sold to the Okafor family, who stayed until their daughter Denise vanished in 2011. Then the Hendersons, who fled after Karen disappeared. Then 3 years of vacancy before I bought it, desperate for a fresh start that was turning into a nightmare. But there was something else, something the property records didn't show, that I only found by digging through old newspaper archives from before the house existed. In 1943, A man named William Thorne was executed for murder. He'd killed 4 people over a span of 8 years, all of them women who lived alone, all of them stalked for weeks before he finally entered their homes and took them. The papers called him the Watcher for his habit of standing outside his victims' houses night after night, never approaching, never acting until some moment only he understood. He was caught when his 5th intended victim shot him through her front window, survived, was tried, was sentenced to death. His final words, according to the court transcript: "I'll stand at the edge of their driveways forever. I'll watch them until the end of time. You can kill my body, but you can't kill what I've become." He was executed in the electric chair on March 15th, 1943. The lot where my house now stands was empty farmland in 1943. But when I checked the historical maps, I found something that made my hands shake. William Thorne was buried in an unmarked grave. The location was never officially recorded. The state didn't want to create a pilgrimage site for the morbidly curious. But there were rumors, notes in old files, suggestions that his body had been disposed of quietly on land outside the city. Land that was developed into a residential neighborhood in 1952, land where my house now stood. I was living on top of William Thorne's grave. I called Frank Henderson that night, tracked him down through social media, left a message explaining who I was and what was happening. He called back within an hour, his voice hollow with a grief that hadn't faded in 4 years. "You need to leave," he said. "Right now, tonight. Don't pack, don't prepare. Just get in your car and drive." I can't just abandon my house. Karen said the same thing. Said we couldn't let him win, couldn't let fear drive us out of our home. His voice cracked. She barricaded herself in our bedroom while I was at work. Thought she'd be safe if she just stayed inside, didn't give him access. What happened? Silence. Then, he didn't need access. He was already inside. Had been for days, maybe weeks, hiding in spaces we didn't know existed. The attic. The crawl space. The gap behind the basement wall. A sound that might have been a sob. He wasn't waiting for her to let him in. He was waiting for the right moment, for her to be alone, for no one to hear her scream. I felt the blood drain from my face. "He's not outside your house, Sarah. He never was. The figure at the driveway, that's just to distract you, to make you focus on the wrong door." I was sitting in my living room. In the house I'd returned to that afternoon, convinced I'd be safe as long as I stayed vigilant. In the house where William Thorne's body was buried beneath the foundation. Above me, the ceiling creaked, the sound of weight shifting, the sound of someone who had been waiting very, very patiently. The sound of footsteps in my attic. I didn't freeze this time. Some part of me had been expecting this, waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the horror to finally materialize into something I could see and touch and fight. I was already moving before the second footstep sounded, grabbing my keys from the counter, sprinting for the front door. The lights went out, all of them, everywhere, plunging the house into absolute darkness. I stumbled, caught myself on the wall, kept moving by memory toward where the door should be. Behind me, I heard the attic hatch creak open, heard something heavy drop onto the hallway floor, heard breathing. Not the ragged breath of exertion, but something slower, deeper. The breath of a man who had been waiting in darkness for a very long time and was finally ready to move. My hand found the doorknob, turned it, pulled. The door didn't open. I yanked harder, threw my weight against it, felt the wood shudder but refused to give. The deadbolt was disengaged. I could feel the lock in the open position, but something was holding the door closed. Something I couldn't see. "You can't leave." The voice came from behind me, close, so close I could feel the displaced air against my neck. "No one leaves. They stay with me, in the dark, forever." I spun around, swinging blindly. My fist connected with something solid, a face, a shoulder, I couldn't tell, and I heard a grunt of surprise. I swung again, felt my knuckles split against teeth and ran, not toward another door. They'd all be sealed. I knew that somehow. Knew that the house itself had become a trap. Instead, I ran toward the kitchen. Toward the back door he'd opened the night before, the one entrance he'd already breached. The door was hanging open, exactly as he'd left it. Cold November air spilling into my kitchen, the backyard beyond lit by the faint glow of the neighbor's porch light. I was almost through when his hand closed around my ankle. I fell hard, chin cracking against the threshold, stars exploding across my vision. He was dragging me backward, pulling me into the house, and I could see his face now in the dim light. The same ordinary features I'd seen on my porch, the same middle-aged man who'd watched me for weeks. But his eyes were wrong. Not empty, not monstrous, just wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. Like they belonged to something wearing a human face as a mask. "The others fought too," he said. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "They all fought, but the house always wins. The house keeps them here, with me, where they belong." I kicked him in the face. My heel connected with his nose and I heard cartilage crunch, felt his grip loosen. I scrambled forward, got my feet under me, ran into the backyard without looking back. The grass was wet with frost, cold enough to burn my bare feet. I kept running, across my yard, over the fence, into Dave's property, pounded on his door again, screamed for help, kept screaming until lights came on and faces appeared. This time, when the police searched my house, they found something. The attic hatch was open. The space inside showed signs of habitation. A sleeping bag, empty food containers, a bucket that served the purpose I didn't want to think about. Someone had been living in my attic for weeks, perhaps longer, watching me through gaps in the ceiling they'd carefully carved. And in the corner, they found photographs, hundreds of them, dating back decades. Karen Henderson in her house, unaware she was being watched. Denise Okafor, walking down her hallway in the middle of the night. Linda Marsh from 1987, Robert Crane from 1994, and other faces I didn't recognize. Victims I'd never found in the newspaper archives. People who'd vanished so completely that no one had even reported them missing. "Jesus Christ," one of the officers said, flipping through the images. "Some of these are from the 50s, the 60s. How is that possible?" I knew how. The man in the photographs never aged, never changed, wore the same ordinary face across 7 decades of watching and waiting and taking. William Thorne had died in 1943, but something had survived. Something that was tied to the house built on his grave, that drew victims to this property and then consumed them one by one. The disappearances, the unmarked grave, the entity that stood at the edge of driveways, all of it was connected. All of it was him. The police found blood on my back door, my blood from where I'd split my chin. But they found something else too. Older blood, dried into the grain of the wood, layered so deep that the forensic team said it could have been accumulating for decades. "He's been using this entrance for years," Detective Morrison told me. Her skepticism was gone now, replaced by something closer to horror. "Every victim, we think he brought them through this door, into the house, and then where?" She didn't answer. But I remembered Frank Henderson's words, the gap behind the basement wall. They found them the next day, behind a false wall in the basement, hidden in a space that shouldn't have existed. They found what remained of the people who'd lived in my house before me. Karen Henderson, Denise Okafor. Others, so decomposed they had to be identified by dental records, by fragments of clothing, by the personal effects still clutched in skeletal hands. 7 bodies, 7 victims spanning 40 years. All of them had been posed facing the same direction, facing upward, facing the floor of my living room, where I'd sat night after night, never knowing what waited beneath my feet. And in the center of the space, older than any of the bodies, was a coffin. Simple pine, rotted with age, bearing a name carved into the lid. William Thorne. Empty. The coffin was empty. They never found him. Never caught the man who had lived in my attic, who had walked through my house while I slept, who had taken 7 people and left their bodies as offerings around his own empty grave. He was gone. Vanished into the same darkness he'd emerged from, leaving behind only photographs and corpses and questions no one could answer. But I knew he wasn't finished, because the last photograph in the stack, the most recent one, dated from 2 nights ago, wasn't of me. It was of a woman I didn't recognize, standing in her kitchen, unaware of the camera. And through her window, I could see a man at the edge of her driveway, watching. I found her. It took 3 days of searching, cross-referencing the background details in the photograph with real estate listings, neighborhood maps, anything that might help me identify the woman William Thorne had chosen as his next victim. I barely slept, barely ate, driven by a desperation I couldn't explain to anyone who hadn't seen what I'd seen. Her name was Michelle Torres, 36 years old, recently divorced, living alone in a house she'd bought 8 months ago. A house 3 miles from mine, in a neighborhood that had been farmland once, before the city expanded outward and swallowed the empty spaces. I drove to her house on a Thursday afternoon, knocked on her door, introduced myself as a neighbor, asked if I could talk to her about something important. She looked at me like I was crazy. Maybe I was. "There's a man," I said. "He stands at the edge of your driveway at night. You might not have noticed him yet, but he's there. He watches you through your windows, learns your schedule, waits until..." "How do you know about that?" I stopped. "You've seen him?" Michelle's face had gone pale. She stepped aside, let me in, closed the door behind us like she was afraid someone might be listening. "He's been there for 2 weeks," she whispered. "Every night, standing at the edge of my property. I called the police, but they said there's nothing they can do. He's not breaking any laws." She was shaking now. "How do you know about him? Who is he?" I told her everything. The photographs, the bodies, the empty coffin beneath my house. William Thorne and his 80 years of watching, of waiting, of taking women who thought they were safe in their own homes. When I finished, Michelle was crying. "What do I do? How do I stop him?" "You leave. Tonight. Don't pack. Don't prepare. Just get in your car and drive as far as you can." I grabbed her hands, squeezed them hard. "He's already inside your house. He's been there for days, maybe weeks, hiding in spaces you don't know exist. If you stay, he'll take you the way he took the others." She left that night. I watched her pack a single bag, get in her car, drive away without looking back. Watched her house from across the street, waiting to see if anything moved in the windows, if anyone emerged from a door that should have stayed closed. Nothing. The house sat dark and silent, keeping its secrets. The police searched it the next day, found signs of habitation in the crawl space, a sleeping bag, food wrappers, another collection of photographs. But no bodies, no William Thorne, just evidence that he'd been there, watching, preparing, before his victim slipped away. I'd saved her. That was something. One woman who wouldn't end up behind a basement wall, posed like an offering to a thing that should have died 80 years ago. But I knew it wasn't over. The house I'd lived in was demolished a month after the bodies were found. The city condemned it, tore it down, salted the earth with enough concrete to bury whatever remained of William Thorne's grave. I watched the wrecking ball swing through walls that had contained so much horror, and I felt nothing. No closure, no relief. Just the hollow certainty that destruction wasn't the same as ending. Because William Thorne wasn't tied to that house. He was tied to watching, to the act of standing at the edge of someone's life and waiting for the right moment to step inside. The grave had been his anchor, maybe, but he'd been leaving it for decades. Walking the streets, finding new victims, building new nests in new houses. The house was gone. He wasn't. I moved across the country, changed my name, changed changed my appearance, changed everything I could think of that might make me harder to find. I live in an apartment now, 5th floor, no attic, no crawl space, no hidden places where someone could watch without being seen. I check every room before I sleep, every closet, every corner, every space large enough to hold a man who doesn't move, doesn't breathe loudly, doesn't do anything except wait. I haven't seen him since that night in my kitchen. Haven't felt that cold certainty of being watched. Haven't woken to footsteps in places footsteps shouldn't be. Maybe he's forgotten about me. Maybe I'm not worth hunting anymore, now that I know what he is. Or maybe he's just being patient. The way he was patient with Karen Henderson, with Denise Okafor, with all the women who thought they'd escaped before he finally came for them. I got a message from Michelle Torres last week. She's living in Oregon now, working remotely, trying to rebuild her life the way I'm trying to rebuild mine. She asked if I thought we were safe, if I thought he'd ever stop. I didn't know how to answer, because 3 nights ago I saw something from my apartment window. A figure on the street below, standing beneath a lamppost, face turned up toward my building. Too far away to identify, too still to be normal, watching with the patience of something that has all the time in the world. I told myself it was nothing. A stranger waiting for a ride, a neighbor taking in the night air. I told myself William Thorne couldn't have found me, not here, not after everything I'd done to disappear. But when I looked again an hour later, the figure was gone. And this morning, I found a photograph slipped under my door. My apartment building, shot from the street, my window circled in red marker. On the back, in handwriting I'd never seen but somehow recognized. I told you, I'll watch them until the end of time. He's not gone. He never left. He's just standing at a different edge now, waiting. And sooner or later, he'll step inside. I check my door every night. Check the locks, the windows, the spaces between walls that shouldn't have spaces at all. I sleep with the lights on and a knife under my pillow and the knowledge that none of it will matter when he finally decides to stop watching and start taking. If you're reading this, if you've ever seen a figure standing at the edge of your property, motionless, patient, watching your windows with eyes that never blink, don't wait for him to come closer. Don't convince yourself it's nothing. Run. Run before he gets inside your house. Run before he gets inside your head. Run before you become another photograph in a collection that stretches back decades. Another body posed in darkness. Another offering to a hunger that never dies. He's out there right now, watching someone. And if you've made it to the end of this story, ask yourself, when was the last time you looked out your window at night? When was the last time you checked the edges of your driveway? When was the last time you were absolutely certain you were alone? Because William Thorne has been watching for 80 years, and he has forever to wait.